Evelyn Moore's hands trembled as champagne glasses clinked around her like accusations. She didn't belong here, not in this marble palace dressed in borrowed silk, not among Boston's elite who wore their wealth like armor. But Marco DeLuca saw her anyway. Across the glittering ballroom, the city's most dangerous man stopped mid-conversation, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't looking at her the way men looked at pretty things. He was looking at her the way predators looked at prey, or the way collectors looked at art they intended to own. Before we begin Evelyn's story, please hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's step into a world where power and vulnerability collide, where one woman's honesty catches the attention of the one man no one dares to refuse. The Harrington Hotel ballroom dripped with old money and older secrets. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors so polished Evelyn could see her own uncertain reflection staring back at her. She smoothed down the emerald dress she'd borrowed from her roommate Claire, the same Claire who'd insisted she come tonight, who'd promised it would be good for her to see how the other half lived. Evelyn was beginning to suspect that had been a lie. "Another champagne, miss." A waiter appeared at her elbow, his expression professionally blank in that way that suggested he knew exactly which guests belonged and which were pretending. "No, thank you." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She'd already nursed one glass for 40 minutes, terrified of the price tag attached to every golden bubble. The waiter glided away, and Evelyn pressed herself closer to the wall, trying to become part of the expensive wallpaper. Around her, Boston's elite circulated like planets in their own solar system. Senators and CEOs, real estate moguls and tech billionaires, all orbiting each other in carefully choreographed patterns of power and influence. She recognized some faces from newspapers. Senator Whitmore with his practiced smile. Catherine Ashford, the venture capitalist whose investments could make or break entire companies. And there, holding court near the orchestra, was Jonathan Harrington himself, the real estate developer whose name was on half the luxury buildings in the city. Evelyn didn't recognize her own reflection in the ornate mirrors lining the walls. The woman staring back at her looked like she belonged, hair swept up in an elegant twist, the emerald silk clinging to curves she usually hid under oversized sweaters, makeup applied with Claire's expert hand. But beneath the borrowed glamour, she was still the girl who'd spent that afternoon serving coffee to businessmen who didn't bother to learn her name, who'd come home to an apartment where the heat barely worked, and eviction notices piled up faster than she could pay them. "There you are," Claire materialized through the crowd, champagne in hand and triumph in her eyes. "I've been looking everywhere. Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." "Claire, I really don't think—" "Don't think, just smile." Claire's grip on her arm was surprisingly firm for someone so slight. She pulled Evelyn through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in rooms like this. "I told you this dress would be perfect. You look incredible." "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Evelyn muttered, but Claire either didn't hear or chose to ignore her. They stopped in front of a cluster of men in expensive suits, their laughter the kind that came from private jokes and insider knowledge. One of them, tall, silver-haired, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, turned as they approached. "Richard, this is my roommate, Evelyn Moore," Claire said brightly. "Evelyn? Richard Blackwell. He owns Blackwell Media Group." Richard's handshake was perfunctory, his attention already sliding past her even as he went through the motions of politeness. "Charming." "And what do you do, Evelyn?" The question everyone at these events asked, the one that determined whether you were worth their time. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush. "I'm a writer." "Published?" His eyebrow arched. "Working on it." The interest died in his eyes immediately. "How nice. If you'll excuse me." He turned back to his conversation as if she'd never existed. Claire's smile never wavered, but Evelyn felt the humiliation burn through her chest. This was why she didn't belong here. In a room full of people who measured worth in net value and influence, she was invisible. "Don't mind him," Claire whispered, pulling her toward the bar. "Richard's a snob. Besides, there are plenty of other people here worth meeting. That's the whole point of events like this, networking. You never know who might be able to help with your writing career." Evelyn doubted anyone here cared about helping a struggling writer with a portfolio of rejection letters and a day job slinging coffee. But she let Claire lead her forward because it seemed easier than arguing. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes who probably wasn't much better off than she was, mixed drinks with practiced efficiency. Evelyn ordered water, ignoring Claire's exasperated sigh. "You're supposed to be enjoying yourself," Claire said. "I am." It was a lie they both knew. "You're hiding. There's a difference." Claire's voice softened slightly. "I know these events can be intimidating, but you have to put yourself out there, Evie. How else are you going to make connections? Meet people who can change your life?" Evelyn took her water, the glass cool against her palm. "I don't think anyone here is interested in changing my life, Claire. Look around. These people don't see us. We're—" The words died in her throat. Across the ballroom, near the sweeping marble staircase that led to private rooms she'd never see, a man stood in conversation with 3 others. But he wasn't engaged in the discussion. His attention had shifted, locked onto something else entirely, locked onto her. Evelyn's breath caught. She'd never seen him before. She would have remembered. He was tall, powerfully built beneath a black suit that probably cost more than her car. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, all sharp angles and classical proportions that somehow avoided being pretty. There was something almost brutal about his handsomeness, a hardness in the set of his jaw and the line of his mouth that suggested he'd never smiled at anything he hadn't earned. But it was his eyes that held her. Dark, intense, focused, with an attention that made everything else in the room blur at the edges. He wasn't looking at her the way Richard Blackwell had, with dismissive assessment and quick disinterest. He was looking at her the way a chess master looked at a board, the way a collector looked at a piece they intended to acquire. He was looking at her like she mattered. "Oh my God," Claire breathed beside her. Is he looking at you? Who is he?" Evelyn couldn't break eye contact, couldn't look away even though every instinct screamed at her to hide, to retreat, to escape that penetrating gaze. "That's Marco DeLuca." Claire's voice had dropped to a whisper, though the man was too far away to hear. "He owns half the waterfront. Shipping, logistics, commercial real estate. People say—" She hesitated, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. "People say he's connected, that his businesses aren't entirely legal, that he's dangerous." Dangerous how? But even as Evelyn asked, she knew. It was in the way people gave him space, the way conversations hushed slightly when he passed, the way his companions stood at angles that suggested both deference and protection. This was a man who didn't follow rules. He wrote them. "The kind of dangerous you don't ask questions about," Claire said. "The kind where people who cross him tend to disappear. Look, he's probably just—" But Marco DeLuca had already moved. He excused himself from his conversation with a gesture that was more command than courtesy and began walking across the ballroom floor, toward them. "Oh God, he's coming over here," Claire whispered frantically. "Evie, do I look okay? Is my hair—" The crowd parted for him. It wasn't obvious. No one scrambled out of his way or showed obvious fear, but there was a subtle shift in the room's energy, conversations pausing mid-sentence, bodies angling to give him clear passage. Even people who weren't looking at him seemed aware of his presence, the way animals sensed predators in their territory. He moved with absolute confidence, each step deliberate and unhurried. There was no doubt about his destination, no hesitation in his approach. His eyes never left Evelyn's, and she felt pinned in place by that dark gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. 10 feet away. 5. Close enough now to see the faint scar along his left cheekbone, the threads of silver at his temples that only made him more devastating, the way his jaw tightened slightly as he took her in from head to toe with an assessment that felt somehow both clinical and intimate. He stopped directly in front of her. Up close he was even more imposing, easily 6'2", with shoulders that strained slightly against his perfectly tailored jacket. He smelled like expensive cologne layered over something darker, something that reminded her of whiskey and smoke and winter nights. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. His voice was low, rough-edged, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. Italian, maybe, from generations back. Claire made a small sound beside her, but Evelyn couldn't look away from the man in front of her. Her voice came out breathless. I don't know you. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, or approval. Marco DeLuca. He extended his hand, not in greeting, but in invitation. And you're Evelyn Moore, 26, English Literature degree from Boston University, currently working at Grayson and Company, while writing freelance articles that don't pay enough to cover rent on the apartment you share with Claire Donovan in Somerville. Your student loans are $63,000. You're 3 weeks behind on your car payment, and your landlord is threatening eviction. The blood drained from Evelyn's face. Claire gasped audibly. Why would you? Evelyn's mind raced, trying to process the violation of privacy, the casual display of knowledge that should have been impossible for a stranger to possess. I know everyone who enters my city, Marco said simply. His hand remained extended between them, steady and patient. I know who belongs and who's pretending. I know who's here to network and who's here to hide. And I know that you, Evelyn Moore, are the only honest thing in this room full of beautiful liars. That's not an answer. She found her voice, found the anger beneath the shock. That's stalking. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. That's due diligence. I don't invest without research. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. And I never claim something without knowing exactly what I'm taking. I'm not something to be claimed. No, he agreed. You're someone to be chosen. There's a difference. His eyes held hers, dark and intense and utterly serious. Dance with me, Evelyn. Let me show you. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to refuse, to walk away from this dangerous man who'd invaded her privacy and thought nothing of approaching her with information he had no right to possess. But there was something in his gaze, not just intensity, but interest, real interest. Not in what she could do for him or who she might connect him with, but in her. For the first time all night, someone was seeing her. Really seeing her. Evelyn placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, strong, proprietary. Smart choice. He led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra transitioned into a waltz. Evelyn had taken exactly 3 ballroom dancing lessons in college for a humanities credit she'd needed, and that had been years ago. But Marco's hand settled at the small of her back with absolute certainty, his grip firm enough to guide her, and suddenly her uncertainty didn't matter. He led, and her body followed. You're afraid of me, he observed as they moved through the steps. You know everything about my financial ruin, and you're telling me that's normal? Evelyn shot back, finding her courage now that they were in motion, now that his attention was focused entirely on her. It's practical. I don't waste time on mysteries I can solve with a single phone call. They turned smoothly, and Evelyn was distantly aware of eyes on them. Dozens of pairs, all watching Marco DeLuca dance with the nobody in borrowed emerald silk. But you're still here, still dancing with me. That's either bravery or stupidity. Maybe it's curiosity, she countered. You went through all that trouble to research me. Why? Because you don't belong here. His hand pressed slightly firmer against her back, drawing her infinitesimally closer. Everyone in this room is performing, playing parts, wearing masks, calculating advantage with every word and smile. But you? You stood by the wall looking like you'd rather be anywhere else, ordering water at an open bar, blushing when men dismissed you. You're genuine in a world that's forgotten what genuine looks like. So I'm a novelty? The words came out sharper than she intended. Something different to entertain you until you get bored? Marco's eyes darkened. You're someone who doesn't lie. Do you know how rare that is? How valuable? They swept past another couple, a senator and his wife who both looked away quickly when Marco's gaze flickered toward them. Everyone here wants something from me. Power, connections, money, protection. They smile and charm and pretend friendship while calculating exactly how to use me. But you? You don't even know what I could offer you. I know you're dangerous, Evelyn said quietly. Claire told me. People are afraid of you. They should be. No apology, no deflection, just simple truth. I built an empire in a city that doesn't give anything freely. That requires certain methods, certain sacrifices. People have learned not to cross me. And that doesn't bother you? Being feared? Fear is honest, Marco said. Fear is people acknowledging exactly who I am without pretense. I prefer it to false affection. His thumb brushed against her spine, a gesture so subtle she might have imagined it. But you're not afraid enough to run. Why? Evelyn considered lying, then remembered what he'd said about honesty. Because you could have approached me however you wanted. Cornered me somewhere private, used what you know about my debts to threaten me, forced me into whatever this is. But you asked me to dance, in front of everyone, like I had a choice. You did have a choice, Marco corrected. You still do. The moment you want to walk away, I let you go. No consequences, no revenge. Just gone. The music swelled around them, and he guided her through a turn that felt effortless. But I don't think you will. Why not? Because you're tired of being invisible. His voice was low, intimate, meant only for her ears. You're tired of working yourself to exhaustion for people who don't see you. Tired of struggling alone, tired of feeling like you don't matter. And right now, Evelyn Moore, you are the center of this entire room's attention. Every person here is watching us, wondering who you are, wondering what you did to catch my interest. You're not invisible anymore. He was right, and she hated that he was right. She could feel the stares, the whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. Women in designer gowns watching with barely concealed envy or calculation. Men in $1,000 suits trying to place her, to understand the equation that had put her in Marco DeLuca's arms. This is a game to you, she said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. No. His hand tightened on hers. Games have rules. Games can be won or lost. This is something else entirely. The music began to wind down, the final notes approaching. Marco leaned in, his lips close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. I'm going to ask you something now, and I need you to listen carefully. Can you do that? Evelyn nodded, her heart racing. When this dance ends, you have two choices. You can walk away, back to Claire, back to your borrowed dress, and your mounting debts, and your invisible life. I won't stop you. I won't contact you. It ends here, and you'll be safe in your obscurity. His voice dropped even lower. Or you can come with me, up those stairs to a private room where we can talk without an audience, where I can show you exactly what I'm offering and what it costs, where you can decide with all the information whether you want what I can give you. And what is it you think you can give me? Evelyn whispered. Everything. Simple. Absolute. Everything you've been denied, everything you've been too afraid to want. Money, security, purpose, protection. A life where you matter, where you're seen, where you never have to worry about eviction notices or student loans or whether you're worth someone's time. The music ended, but he didn't release her. But it comes with a price. Nothing is free, Evelyn. Not even from me. Especially not from me. She should walk away. Every ounce of common sense screamed at her to thank him politely and retreat to Claire's side, to escape this dangerous man with his dangerous promises and his knowledge of her struggles. This was how people got trapped, lured in by offers too good to be true, by powerful men who saw vulnerability as opportunity. But Marco DeLuca wasn't lying to her. He wasn't pretending this was anything other than what it was. A transaction, an offer, a choice with consequences she couldn't yet see. And God help her, she was tired. Tired of struggling, tired of being invisible, tired of rejection letters and dismissive glances and the crushing weight of debt that never seemed to shrink, no matter how hard she worked. The stairs, Evelyn heard herself say. Show me. Something blazed in Marco's eyes, triumph, satisfaction, and something else she couldn't name. Remember, he said softly, you can still walk away. Anytime. All you have to do is say the word. He released her hand but kept his palm pressed to her lower back as he guided her through the crowd. The whispers intensified, heads turning to track their progress. Evelyn felt Claire's shocked stare, saw Richard Blackwell's eyebrows rise in surprise, caught Senator Whitmore's calculating gaze as they passed. Let them watch, she thought with sudden defiance. Let them wonder. The marble staircase swept upward in a graceful curve, leading to the hotel's private event spaces and VIP suites. Marco's hand never left her back as they climbed, and two men in dark suits materialized from nowhere to fall into step behind them. Security, she realized. Guards. Do they follow you everywhere? She asked. Everywhere that matters. Marco nodded to a third guard stationed at the top of the stairs. When you have enemies, vigilance isn't optional. Do you have a lot of enemies? I have exactly as many as I need to prove I'm doing something right. He led her down a carpeted hallway, away from the ballroom's noise. People who coast through life making everyone happy build nothing worth having. The only question is whether your enemies fear you enough to stay in the shadows or hate you enough to step into the light. They stopped in front of an ornate door marked private. Marco produced a key card. Of course, he had access to the VIP floors, and pushed the door open, gesturing for her to enter first. The room beyond was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Boston's glittering skyline. The city spread out like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Expensive furniture arranged in conversation clusters, a full bar in one corner, artwork on the walls that probably cost more than her college education. Marco dismissed his guards with a subtle gesture, and the door closed behind them with a soft click. They were alone. Evelyn walked to the windows, needing the space, needing a moment to process what she was doing. Behind her, she heard Marco moving to the bar, the clink of crystal. Whiskey? He asked. Or do you still prefer water? Whiskey. If she was going to do this, whatever this was, she might as well commit. He poured 2 glasses, neat, and crossed to where she stood. Up close, backlit by the city, he looked less like a businessman and more like what he actually was. A predator in expensive clothing, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. 2 honest conversations, he said, raising his glass. Evelyn touched her glass to his. To knowing exactly what I'm getting into. That's the problem, though, isn't it? Marco took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. You don't know, you can't. Because I could tell you everything, what I do, what I've done, what I'm capable of, and you still wouldn't truly understand until you saw it for yourself. Then why bring me here? Why not just... She gestured vaguely, uncertain how to finish. Seduce you? Buy you? Force you? Marco's mouth twisted slightly. Because those are temporary. Coercion creates resentment. Fear creates betrayal. I don't need another frightened mistress or another employee who smiles while plotting escape. I need someone who chooses to be here with full knowledge of what that means. And what does it mean? Evelyn set her glass down on a nearby table, crossing her arms. You researched me. You know I'm drowning financially, and now you're dangling salvation in front of me. That's not really a free choice, is it? That's exploitation dressed up in expensive whiskey and city views. Yes, Marco agreed, and his honesty caught her off guard. It is. I'm using your circumstances to create leverage. I'm offering you something you need in exchange for something I want. That's not altruism, Evelyn. It's business. The question is whether you can live with the transaction. What is it you want from me? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Because I don't have connections or influence or anything someone like you would need. You have honesty, Marco said simply. In my world, everyone lies. My business partners lie about their loyalty while searching for better offers. My employees lie about their competence while covering mistakes. My rivals lie about their intentions while plotting my downfall. Even my allies lie about their motives because truth is weakness and weakness is death. He moved closer and Evelyn forced herself not to retreat. But you stood in that ballroom looking lost and out of place, and when I approached you, you didn't pretend to know who I was or simper about what an honor it was. You called me a stalker. You challenged me. You were real. So I'm supposed to be your, what? Your conscience? The absurdity of it made her laugh, sharp and bitter. The good woman who reforms the bad man? That's not reality, Marco. That's a fairy tale. I don't need reform, Marco said flatly. I need perspective. I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong, who won't calculate advantage before speaking, who sees me as something other than a weapon to be aimed or a vault to be opened. His hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching. And you need security, money, protection from landlords and creditors, and the slow grinding poverty that's killing your dreams one rejection letter at a time. We can help each other. By doing what? Evelyn demanded. You still haven't actually explained what this arrangement would be. Marco's hand dropped. You would be mine. Publicly, visibly mine. You'd attend events with me, appear at my side when needed, live in an apartment I provide rent-free. In exchange, your debts disappear, your student loans paid, your car kept, your rent covered. You'd have space to write, time to pursue your career without the constant terror of poverty. So a mistress, Evelyn said. You want to buy a mistress. I want a partner who understands what she's agreeing to, Marco corrected. Yes, there would be expectations of intimacy. I'm not pretending this is platonic. But this isn't about ownership. You keep your independence, your choices, your life. The only thing I require is honesty and loyalty. Loyalty to a criminal, Evelyn pointed out. Because let's not pretend your business is entirely legal. No, Marco agreed. Let's not pretend. I operate in gray areas, import-export businesses that sometimes import things customs doesn't approve, real estate acquisitions that occasionally involve convincing previous owners to sell, protection services that compete with official law enforcement. I've broken laws. I've hurt people who threaten me or mine. I've built an empire that exists because I'm willing to do what softer men aren't. And you want me to be okay with that? I want you to acknowledge it, Marco said. I want you to understand exactly who I am before you decide whether to accept what I'm offering. Because once you're mine, Evelyn, the world sees you differently. They see you as my weakness, my vulnerability, and people who want to hurt me will try to hurt you. The weight of that settled over her like a shroud. This wasn't just about money or security. It was about stepping into a world where violence was currency and loyalty was the only thing that mattered. Where being seen meant being targeted. You're trying to scare me away, she realized. I'm trying to give you informed consent, Marco countered. I'm trying to make sure that if you say yes, you mean it. That you're not just desperate enough to ignore the danger, but aware enough to choose it anyway. He finished his whiskey, set the glass aside. Because I've seen what happens when people agree to things they don't understand. They break. They run. They betray. And I don't want that for you. I don't want to watch you shatter. Why? The question burst out of her. Why me? Why go through all this trouble for some struggling writer you saw across a ballroom? You could have anyone. Women with power and connections, women who understand your world, women who wouldn't need this explained. Marco was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every feature. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard yet. Because everyone else wants Marco DeLuca. The name, the power, the empire. They want what I can do for them. But you looked at me in that ballroom and saw a stranger. A dangerous stranger, yes, but still just a man. Not a myth, not a monster. Not a stepping stone to something better. His jaw tightened. I've spent 15 years building this empire. 15 years of being feared and respected and courted and used. And I'm tired, Evelyn. Tired of games and manipulation and calculated affection. When I saw you tonight, standing there so obviously uncomfortable and out of place and honest about it, I wanted that. I wanted someone real. The vulnerability in his voice undid something in her chest. This wasn't a performance. This was truth, raw and unguarded in a way that contradicted everything she'd heard about Marco DeLuca. I need time, she said, to think, to really consider what you're offering. No. The word was gentle but absolute. Time lets fear win. Time lets logic drown out instinct. I need your answer now, Evelyn. Not because I'm trying to manipulate you, but because if you can't decide right now with all the information, with your eyes open, with full awareness of what you're choosing, then you'll never be able to decide. You'll second guess. You'll hesitate. And hesitation in my world gets people killed. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, Marco agreed. But it's real, and real is all I can offer you. He extended his hand between them, palm up, waiting. Choose, Evelyn Moore, safety and invisibility, or danger in being seen, poverty with principles intact, or security with compromises required, your old life or something new. But choose now and mean it. Evelyn stared at his outstretched hand, strong fingers, calloused despite the expensive suits. a signet ring on his right hand with initials she couldn't read in the dim light. This hand had built an empire. This hand had hurt people. This hand was offering her salvation with strings attached. She thought about her apartment with its broken heat and threatening notices, about her student loans that grew faster than she could pay them, about rejection letters and dismissive editors and the slow, crushing realization that maybe she'd never make it as a writer, that maybe she'd spend her life serving coffee to people who didn't see her until she was old and bitter and full of regrets. She thought about Claire, who'd brought her here tonight. Claire with her trust fund and her connections and her casual assumption that opportunities just appeared if you networked enough. Claire, who didn't understand what it meant to drown slowly in debt, to feel your dreams slipping away one unpaid bill at a time. She thought about Marco DeLuca, this dangerous, beautiful man who'd researched her struggles and approached her anyway, who danced with her in front of everyone, who was offering her a choice instead of simply taking what he wanted, who saw her. Evelyn placed her hand in his. "I want to see it," she said. "Your world, what you do, who you really are, no filters. No performance. If I'm going to agree to this, I need to see all of it." Marco's fingers closed around hers, warm and certain. That's not a yes. That's not a no either. She met his eyes, finding her courage. "You said everyone in your world lies. You said you wanted honesty. So here's my honesty. I don't know you well enough to commit to anything, but I'm interested enough to find out if what you're offering is real. Show me your world, Marco. Show me who you are when the masks come off, and then I'll give you my answer." For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that should have felt old-fashioned but instead felt intimate, possessive, like a brand. 7 days, he said against her skin. "I'll give you 7 days to see everything. My businesses, my enemies, my life. Complete transparency. And at the end of those 7 days, you decide, all in or walk away. No middle ground." 7 days, Evelyn agreed, her heart pounding. "Starting now." Marco released her hand and pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "My driver will take you home. Tomorrow morning, a car will pick you up at 8. Wear something comfortable. We're going to the docks." "The docks?" "Where it all started," Marco said. "Where I built my first warehouse, made my first deal, broke my first rival. If you want to understand who I am, that's where we begin." His eyes glinted in the low light. "Fair warning, Evelyn. What you see tomorrow might send you running. The docks aren't pretty, the business isn't clean, and the man I am there isn't the one who danced with you tonight." "Good," Evelyn said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I don't want pretty lies. I want the truth." "Then truth is what you'll get." Marco walked her to the door, his hand once again settling at the small of her back like it belonged there. "But remember, you asked for this. Whatever you see in the next 7 days, whatever you learn about me and my world, you chose to know it. No victim claiming, no moral high ground. You walked in with eyes open." "Understood." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Marco, why 7 days? Why not 1 or 2 or a month?" "Because 7 days is how long it took me to build my first empire," he said. 7 days from nothing to something. 7 days to prove I could survive in a world that wanted me dead. If I could become who I am in 7 days, you can decide who you want to be in the same time. The drive home was quiet. Marco's driver, a silent man with careful eyes, navigated Boston's streets, while Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cool window and tried to process what had just happened. She'd gone to a charity gala to make Claire happy, and somehow ended up agreeing to 7 days with one of the city's most dangerous men. When she stumbled into her apartment near midnight, Claire was waiting on the couch, 2 glasses of wine already poured. "You have exactly 30 seconds to tell me everything before I die of curiosity," Claire said, shoving a glass into Evelyn's hands. "Marco DeLuca, Evie. You disappeared with Marco DeLuca. Everyone was talking about it. Do you know how many people asked me who you were? How you knew him?" Evelyn kicked off her borrowed heels and collapsed onto the couch. "I don't know him. I didn't until tonight." "Then why did he single you out? Why the dance? Why the—" Claire gestured wildly. "The everything?" "He offered me a job," Evelyn lied, or half-lied. She wasn't ready to explain the full scope of Marco's proposal, wasn't ready for Claire's judgment, or concern or whatever reaction the truth would bring. Research assistant for his real estate holdings. He said he needs someone who can write reports and analyze properties. It was plausible enough that Claire's suspicion faded slightly. That's amazing. The pay must be incredible. God, Evie, this could solve all your money problems. Maybe. Evelyn sipped her wine, tasting nothing. I'm supposed to meet him tomorrow, see the operation, decide if it's right for me. If it's right for you? Claire laughed. This is Marco DeLuca. You don't turn down opportunities like this. Do you know how many people would kill for a chance to work with him? Probably, literally, Evelyn thought, but didn't say. I'll see how it goes. She spent the night staring at her ceiling, running through every moment of the evening. Marco's intensity, his honesty about the danger, his hand at her back and his lips on her knuckles. The way he'd looked at her like she was the only real thing in a room full of illusions. At 7 the next morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Car arrives at 8. Dress warm. Bring questions. M. Evelyn stared at the message for a long moment, then got up to shower. She had 7 days to see the truth about Marco DeLuca. 7 days to decide if she could live with what she found. 7 days to choose between safety and risk, invisibility and danger, poverty and power. She chose jeans and a warm sweater, practical boots, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When the black sedan pulled up at exactly 8 o'clock, she was waiting. The driver who'd taken her home last night opened the door. Miss Moore? Mr. DeLuca is waiting at the docks. Evelyn slid into the car, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Through the tinted windows, Boston rolled past, familiar streets taking her to unfamiliar territory. To the waterfront where Marco DeLuca had built his empire. To the truth she'd demanded to see. To whatever came next. The Boston waterfront at 8 in the morning was a different world from the glittering ballroom. Salt air cut through the crisp November wind, carrying the smell of brine and diesel fuel, and something darker, the kind of industrial grit that came from decades of commerce, both legal and otherwise. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter as the sedan rolled past chain-link fences and warehouses with names she didn't recognize, their metal sides streaked with rust and peeling paint. They turned down a private access road, and suddenly the landscape shifted. The dilapidated buildings gave way to a modern complex, clean lines, new construction, security cameras visible at every corner. A sign in brushed steel read, DeLuca Logistics and Import, with smaller text beneath listing a dozen subsidiary companies. The car stopped in front of the main building. Marco stood waiting at the entrance, dressed down from last night's formal elegance, but no less commanding in dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, and a leather jacket that had seen actual use. 2 men flanked him, the same security from the hotel, she realized. Miss Moore. Marco opened her door himself, offering his hand. Welcome to where it all began. Evelyn stepped out, studying the building with a writer's eye for detail. This doesn't look like where criminal empires start. That's because you're seeing version 3.0. Marco gestured for her to follow him inside. The original warehouse was condemned 4 years ago. Structural damage, foundation issues, rats the size of house cats. But it served its purpose for a long time before that. The interior was sleek and professional, polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, modern lighting. They passed through a reception area where a woman in her 50s looked up from her computer and nodded respectfully at Marco, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Evelyn. Morning, Angela, Marco said without stopping. Hold my calls for the next 2 hours. Of course, Mr. DeLuca. Angela's gaze tracked Evelyn with undisguised curiosity. They took an elevator to the 3rd floor, Marco's security remaining in the lobby. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor lined with glass-walled offices. Through the transparent walls, Evelyn could see people working, some on computers, others on phones, a few in meetings around conference tables. It looked like any modern business. Legitimate operations, Marco explained, reading her expression. Import-export licensing, customs brokerage, freight forwarding, everything above board, fully legal, taxed appropriately. This is what the IRS sees when they audit my books. And what don't they see? Marco's mouth curved. Smart question. Come on. He led her to a corner office with his name on the door and a view of the harbor beyond. The space was surprisingly understated. A desk, Comfortable chairs, bookshelves lined with volumes on maritime law and international trade regulations. One wall held framed photographs, a younger Marco with an older man who shared his features, standing in front of the original warehouse. Marco shaking hands with various officials at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, a faded picture of a woman with dark hair and Marco's eyes. "My mother," Marco said, catching her looking at the photograph. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments she needed." Evelyn heard the weight behind those words, the history compressed into simple facts. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me that money isn't evil. The lack of it is." He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer and pulling out a leather-bound ledger. "This is what you asked to see. The truth." He opened the ledger, turning it so she could read. Pages of entries in neat handwriting, dates, amounts, descriptions. Evelyn scanned the columns, her understanding growing with each line. Pharmaceuticals, unauthorized import, $340,000, protection services, Moretti territory, $75,000, real estate acquisition, convincing previous owner, $850,000, information brokerage, Senator W., $120,000. "These are crimes," Evelyn said quietly. "These are services," Marco corrected. "Pharmaceuticals that people need but can't afford through legal channels. Protection for businesses in neighborhoods where police response is slow or non-existent. Real estate deals where the previous owners were sitting on valuable property and refusing reasonable offers. Information that powerful people want kept private." "That's just semantics. You're still breaking laws." "Yes." Marco didn't flinch from it. "I'm breaking laws that are unjust, inefficient, or selectively enforced. I'm providing what the system fails to provide. Does that make me noble? No. Does it make me necessary? Ask the diabetic who can afford insulin through my supply chain when the pharmaceutical companies price it at $600 a vial. Ask the shop owner in Dorchester who keeps his windows intact because he pays me instead of replacing glass every week while waiting for police who never come. Ask the families living in affordable housing in buildings I acquired and renovated instead of tearing down for luxury condos." "You're justifying it," Evelyn said, "making yourself the hero of your own story." "I'm explaining context," Marco replied. "I don't need to be the hero. I just need you to understand that the world isn't as simple as legal versus illegal, good versus evil. It's about power and who wields it. I wield mine for profit, yes, but also for stability, for order. The alternative isn't virtuous law enforcement, it's chaos." Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at the harbor where cargo ships sat at anchor, their metal hulls gleaming in the morning light. "How much of what comes through those ships is illegal?" "About 30%. Marco joined her at the window, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool office. "Medications mostly. Some luxury goods avoiding tariffs, occasionally other items for specialized clients." "Weapons?" "No." The word was flat, absolute. "I don't traffic in weapons or anything that's purely designed to harm. No drugs beyond pharmaceuticals, no human trafficking, no children, no exploitation. I have lines, Evelyn. They're different from legal lines, but they exist." "And the people who cross them?" Marco was quiet for a moment. "Last year, a crew working for me decided to expand into territories I'd specifically forbidden. Harder drugs, product that destroyed communities. I'd warned them. Gave them chances to correct course." His jaw tightened. "They didn't listen. What happened to them?" "They're no longer in Boston." Something in his voice suggested they were no longer anywhere. "I don't enjoy violence, Evelyn, but I won't let my empire be used for things I consider unconscionable. The moment someone mistakes my patience for weakness, I remind them what I'm capable of." A knock at the door interrupted them. A man in his 40s entered, broad-shouldered, with a scar along his jaw and eyes that had seen things Evelyn probably didn't want to imagine. "Boss, we got a situation at Warehouse 7, the man said, then stopped when he saw Evelyn. "Sorry, didn't know you had company." "It's fine, Vincent. This is Evelyn Moore. She's learning the business." Marco turned to Evelyn. "Vincent runs security across all my properties. 17 years with me, saved my life twice, and makes the best espresso in Boston despite looking like he could break concrete with his bare hands. Vincent's stern expression cracked slightly. Boss exaggerates. I've only saved his life once and a half. The half being that time with the Moretti cousin, who couldn't shoot straight, Marco agreed. What's the situation? Customs inspection at Warehouse 7, unscheduled, Inspector Davies with 2 rookies. Vincent's tone suggested this was significant. Davies is usually Tuesday afternoons, Marco said thoughtfully. Why the deviation? Could be random. Could be someone paid him to poke around. Or could be someone wants to see how we react to surprise inspections. Marco checked his watch. Warehouse 7 is clean, right? Clean as Sunday church. We moved the gray inventory to Warehouse 12 last week after that tip from your guy at the Port Authority. Marco nodded, then looked at Evelyn. Want to see how legitimate business operates under pressure? Something in his eyes told her this was a test, not of her, but for her. He was showing her how he worked, how he navigated the razor's edge between legal commerce and criminal enterprise. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Yes. The drive to Warehouse 7 took 15 minutes. Vincent drove while Marco made phone calls in Italian, too rapid for Evelyn to follow, his tone shifting between conversational and commanding. When he ended the last call, he turned to her. Inspector Davies has been on my payroll for 3 years, he explained. Not for illegal purposes. I pay him to be thorough, to catch anything my people might miss in our legitimate operations. Keep us clean where it matters, but showing up unannounced with rookies suggests he's either testing them or someone's testing him. Why would someone test him? To see if he's loyal to me or to whoever's offering a better price, Marco said. Loyalty is currency in my world, Evelyn. More valuable than money, more dangerous than weapons. If Davies has flipped, I need to know. If he hasn't, I need to reward that faith. Warehouse 7 sat near the water, a massive steel structure with loading docks and semi-trucks backed up to receive cargo. A government sedan was parked near the entrance, and through the warehouse's open bay doors, Evelyn could see 3 men in official jackets examining shipping containers. Marco exited the car with absolute calm, his posture relaxed, his expression pleasant. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the intense, dangerous man from his office, replaced by a successful businessman greeting unexpected government visitors. Inspector Davies, Marco called out, approaching with his hand extended. This is a surprise. I don't think we had an inspection scheduled for today. Davies was a slight man in his 50s with thinning hair and eyes that missed nothing. He shook Marco's hand, his smile professional but strained. Unannounced inspections are part of the protocol, Mr. DeLuca, keeping everyone honest. Of course. Of course. I appreciate your diligence. Marco gestured to the warehouse. As you can see, everything's in order. Current manifests are in the office. Would you like coffee while your team works? We just got a new espresso machine. That won't be necessary. Davies glanced at the 2 younger inspectors, who were opening containers and checking labels against clipboards. This is Inspectors Chen and Rodriguez. Training day. Excellent. Everyone should learn proper procedure. Marco's tone was genial, but Evelyn noticed how his eyes tracked every movement of the 3 men, how he positioned himself with clear sightlines to all of them. Evelyn, why don't you wait in the office with Vincent? Inspector Davies and I can discuss the finer points of import regulations. It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn let Vincent guide her to a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. Through the glass windows, she watched Marco and Davies walk slowly through the space, Marco gesturing to various containers, Davies nodding and making notes. He's good at this, Vincent said quietly beside her. The boss, I mean. Making the dangerous look normal. Making power look like courtesy. Has Davies betrayed him? Evelyn asked. Vincent's expression was unreadable. We'll know in about 5 minutes. They watched in silence. The 2 rookie inspectors were thorough, opening random containers, checking seals, photographing labels. Everything they found matched the manifest perfectly. Household goods, textiles, electronics, all with proper import documentation and tax stamps. Nothing remotely illegal. Then Inspector Chen moved toward a specific container in the back corner, one marked with a blue stripe along its edge. Evelyn saw Marco's shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly, saw Davies pause mid-sentence. That container there? Chen called out. The manifest says industrial machinery, but it's marked as temperature-controlled. Why would machinery need climate control? Davies turned to Marco, and for a moment the entire warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Then Davies smiled. Medical imaging equipment, Davies said smoothly. MRI components require temperature stability during transport. It's in the detailed manifest, Chen. Page 17, subsection C. He walked over to the rookie, pulling out his own paperwork. See? Everything properly documented. This is why we check the fine print. Chen examined the paperwork, then nodded. My mistake, sir. Common oversight. You'll learn. Davies clapped him on the shoulder, then turned back to Marco. Everything appears in order, Mr. DeLuca. My compliments to your documentation team. I'll pass that along, Marco said. And Inspector Davies? Thank you for being so thorough. It's reassuring to know the system works as intended. Something passed between them. An acknowledgement. A confirmation. Davies nodded once, gathered his rookies, and departed. The moment the government sedan pulled away, Marco's entire demeanor shifted. He pulled out his phone and made a single call. It's me. Davies is solid. Someone sent him to test our warehouse security with fresh eyes. I need to know who and why by end of business today. He listened for a moment. No, don't approach Davies. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. Send him the usual bonus and a case of that scotch he likes. Let him know we appreciate his attention to detail. Marco ended the call and turned to where Evelyn stood with Vincent. That container Chen was interested in? The one with medical imaging equipment? Evelyn asked. Has medical imaging equipment in it, along with about $300,000 worth of pharmaceuticals that would require prescriptions most people can't afford. Marco's expression was grim. Davies knew exactly what was in there. He steered Chen away from opening it while making it look like proper procedure. That's loyalty, Evelyn. That's what it looks like when someone chooses their allegiance despite opportunities to betray it. He lied to a federal inspector for you, Evelyn said. He protected a shipment that will keep dozens of diabetics alive when they can't afford their insulin otherwise, Marco countered. He protected medications that will go to free clinics in neighborhoods where people choose between drugs and rent. He protected a supply chain that the legal system has failed to provide affordably. Marco moved closer to her. I told you I operate in gray areas. This is what that looks like. Not comic book villainy, but complicated choices with no perfect answers. Except you profit from it, Evelyn pointed out. However much good those medications do, you're still making money. Yes. No deflection, no justification. I profit, because profit is what sustains the operation. It's what lets me pay people like Davies, maintain these facilities, fund the logistics that get those medications where they need to go. Charity without sustainability is just theater. I'm building something that lasts. Vincent cleared his throat. Boss, we should move. You've got the meeting with the Calabrese family at noon. Marco checked his watch, then looked at Evelyn. That meeting is about a territory dispute in the North End. Restaurants, protection services, waste management contracts. The Calabrese family thinks they can expand into areas I've held for 5 years. Today we negotiate who controls what. He paused. You can sit this one out if you want. It won't be pleasant. I said I wanted to see everything, Evelyn reminded him. No filters. Then let's go. Marco's hand found the small of her back again, that gesture of possession and protection she was beginning to recognize. But Evelyn, in that meeting you don't speak, you observe. The Calabrese family is old school. They won't appreciate a woman having input. And if they think you're important to me, they might try to use that. So you're just an observer today, understood? The authority in his voice grated, but Evelyn understood the logic. Understood. They drove to a restaurant in the North End, not one of the tourist spots with red checkered tablecloths and Dean Martin playing on loop, but a quiet establishment with no sign out front and windows covered in heavy curtains. Vincent opened her door, then positioned himself at Marco's left shoulder as they entered. The restaurant's interior was dim, lit by wall sconces that cast more shadow than light. A long table dominated the back room, and around it sat 5 men in expensive suits. At the head of the table, a man in his 60s with silver hair and hands like gnarled tree roots gestured for them to sit. Marco DeLuca, the man said, his accent thick with old country Italian. You're late. I'm exactly on time, Don Calabrese, Marco replied, taking a seat across from him. Your watch must be running fast. Don Calabrese's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. Still got that mouth on you. Your father, God rest him, he knew when to speak and when to listen. You could learn from that. My father also knew when to hold territory and when to defend it, Marco said smoothly. Which brings us to today's conversation. Evelyn sat in a chair against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. The other men at the table ignored her completely, their attention fixed on Marco and Don Calabrese. The air felt thick with tension, with history she didn't understand. You've had the North End long enough, one of the younger Calabrese men said, mid-30s, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Time to share the wealth. Let other families in. But share implies I took something that wasn't mine, Marco replied. I built that territory from nothing. Every restaurant that pays me for protection does so because I actually protect them. Every waste management contract I hold is because I provide better service at better prices. You don't get to walk in and claim half of what I built. Your father had an understanding with us, Don Calabrese said. Before he died, we had agreements, territories, percentages, respect. My father's been dead for 8 years, Marco said quietly. His agreements died with him. I've honored what made sense and renegotiated what didn't. The North End is mine, Don Calabrese. That's not changing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The younger Calabrese men shifted in their seats, hands moving toward jacket pockets. Vincent's posture changed subtly, ready for violence. You're very confident for someone outnumbered, Don Calabrese observed. I'm very confident for someone who's right, Marco corrected. You want the North End? You can have it. After you prove you can take it from me, send your men. Let's see how that works out. But we both know how it ends, Don Calabrese. Your people bleeding in the streets, my people defending what's ours, and the police getting involved because you made it too visible. Is that really what you want? Attention? Investigation? Federal interest in our operations? Don Calabrese's jaw worked, grinding over options. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. What are you offering? Status quo, what? Marco said. You keep your territories, I keep mine. No expansion, no encroachment. I'll even throw in a gesture of goodwill. Your nephew Anthony wants to open a restaurant on Hanover Street, my territory. I'll give him favorable protection rates for the first year. Show that we can work together without stepping on each other's toes. Anthony's restaurant for the entire North End? The younger Calabrese with the scarred eyebrow laughed harshly. That's insulting. That's realistic, Marco shot back. You came here wanting something for nothing. I'm giving you something for peace. Take it or leave it, but stop pretending you have leverage you don't actually possess. Don Calabrese studied Marco for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. Your father would be proud. Tough, but smart. Knows when to fight and when to deal. He extended his hand across the table. We have an agreement. No expansion, no encroachment. Anthony gets his restaurant deal. Marco shook his hand. And if anyone from your family tests that agreement, I'll handle them myself, Don Calabrese promised. The old ways still matter, Marco. Family discipline, territory respect. We understand each other. The meeting ended with espresso and stiff pleasantries. As they left, Evelyn felt the adrenaline draining from her system, leaving her shaky. She hadn't realized how tense she'd been until they were back in the car, Vincent driving them away from the restaurant. That could have gone very badly, she said quietly. Yes, Marco agreed. If Don Calabrese had been younger and prouder, if his sons had more influence, if I'd shown weakness or uncertainty, any of those variables shifts and we're at war. He looked at her. But I knew Don Calabrese would take the deal. He's old school. He values stability over expansion, peace over profit. His younger relatives want to prove themselves by taking my territory, but he knows what war costs. So I gave him a way to save face while keeping what's mine. You gambled, Evelyn said. You bet on knowing him better than he knew himself. I bet on 15 years of watching how he operates, understanding his values, respecting his intelligence. Marco's hand found hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. That's what this life is, Evelyn. Calculated risks, reading people, knowing when to push and when to yield, and always being prepared for the moment things go wrong. Does it ever get easier? The tension, the danger? No, Marco said honestly. You just get better at hiding how much it affects you. He studied her face. You're handling this better than I expected. Most people would have run by now. I'm terrified, Evelyn admitted. In that restaurant, when those men reached for their pockets, I thought... She stopped, swallowing hard. You thought you might see someone die, Marco finished. And you stayed in your chair, didn't scream, didn't panic, didn't draw attention that would have made things worse. His grip on her hand tightened. That's strength, Evelyn. Real strength. Not pretending you're not afraid, but being afraid and functioning anyway. They spent the afternoon at Marco's legitimate offices, and Evelyn got a glimpse of the other side of his empire. She sat in on a meeting about a real estate development project. Luxury condos on the waterfront, all perfectly legal, all generating enormous profit. She watched Marco negotiate with architects and contractors, his mind shifting seamlessly from crime boss to businessman, his intelligence evident in how he dissected proposals and found flaws in projections. You're good at this, she said during a break between meetings. The legitimate stuff. Why not just focus on this instead of the illegal operations? Because this isn't enough, Marco said. Legal business moves slowly. Building codes, permits, inspections, regulations designed to protect established interests and block newcomers. It took me 3 years to get approval for that waterfront project. 3 years of paying lawyers and bribing inspectors and fighting neighborhood associations. My illegal operations? I can make decisions and implement them in hours. No committees, no bureaucracy, just direct action. He leaned against his desk. The legitimate business gives me cover and respectability. The illegal operations give me power and speed. I need both. Evening came, and Marco drove her himself this time, his security following in a separate car. They went to a house in Brookline, a beautiful old brownstone with ivy climbing its walls and lights glowing warm in the windows. This is mine, Marco said as they climbed the front steps. My actual home, not an investment property or a safe house. The place I go when I'm tired of performing. Inside the house was a revelation. Books everywhere, shelves lining the walls, stacks on tables, architectural volumes spread across a drafting desk in what must have been a study. The furniture was comfortable rather than showpiece elegant, and photographs covered one wall. Marco's mother smiling in a garden, a young Marco in a college graduation gown, more recent photos of construction projects and buildings he'd developed. You love architecture, Evelyn realized, studying the drafting desk with its sketches and blueprints. I wanted to be an architect, Marco said. Before my mother got sick, before money became survival instead of ambition, I was going to design buildings that lasted, that became part of the city's identity. He picked up one of the sketches, a soaring tower with clean lines and innovative use of space. This was my senior thesis project. My professor said it was brilliant, said I had real talent. What happened? My mother died owing $600,000 in medical bills. Insurance denied most of the treatments as experimental. The hospital put liens on our house. Creditors called daily. Marco set the sketch down. I had a choice: bankruptcy and destroy my father's legacy, or find a way to make enough money fast enough to matter. Legal architecture doesn't pay $600,000 in debt. Illegal operations do. So you built an empire to pay medical bills, Evelyn said softly. I built an empire to prove that poverty would never control me again, Marco corrected. The bills were just the catalyst, but yes, in the beginning it was about saving my father from losing everything my mother had worked for. Later, it became about power, control, making sure I'd never be helpless again. He poured them wine, a rich Italian red that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and they sat in his living room as darkness fell over Boston. Through the windows, the city lights sparkled like earthbound stars. Your 7 days isn't really about showing me your business, is it? Evelyn asked. It's about showing me you. Yes. Marco swirled his wine, watching the light catch in the liquid. Anyone can see Marco DeLuca, the crime boss. That's public knowledge, street reputation. But I wanted you to see the whole picture. The violence and the architecture, the crime and the legitimate business, the man who negotiates with threats, and the man who sketches buildings he'll never design. He looked at her. I wanted you to decide based on truth, not mythology. Why does it matter so much? Evelyn pressed. You could have anyone. Why does my decision carry this much weight? Marco was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because everyone else sees what they want to see. They see power and want to use it. They see money and want to take it. They see danger and want to either run from it or control it. But you, he set his wine down, turning to face her fully. You see me. Not Marco DeLuca the Empire, but the man who still sketches buildings, who pays medical bills for strangers, who holds territory not just for profit, but because chaos is worse than controlled order. You see the contradictions and you don't immediately try to resolve them into something simpler. You let me be complicated. Everyone's complicated, Evelyn said. Not everyone admits it. Marco reached out, his fingers brushing along her jaw. I've spent 15 years building walls, projecting strength, hiding vulnerabilities, and you walk into my life asking uncomfortable questions and demanding honesty I haven't given anyone else. It's terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. His touch sent heat through her skin. Evelyn's breath caught, her heart racing. Marco, I'm not going to kiss you, he said quietly. Not until you've seen everything. Not until you make your choice with full knowledge. I won't seduce you into this, Evelyn. I won't let you later question whether desire clouded your judgment. The restraint in his voice, the way his hand trembled slightly against her skin, told her how much that cost him. Evelyn leaned into his touch. What if I want you to kiss me? Then you'll want it just as much after 7 days, Marco said. And it will mean more. Because you'll have chosen it, chosen me, with your eyes completely open. He pulled back and Evelyn felt the loss of his warmth immediately. It's late. Vincent will drive you home. Tomorrow I have business in Cambridge. Nothing dramatic, just meetings. But I want you there. Want you to see the boring parts too. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Evelyn stared out the window, processing everything she'd seen. The warehouse inspection, the Calabrese negotiation, Marco's home with its architectural dreams and honest vulnerability. She was falling into something dangerous, she realized. Not just physically dangerous, though that was real enough, but emotionally dangerous. She was starting to see Marco DeLuca not as a crime boss or a powerful benefactor, but as a man, complicated and brilliant and damaged and real. Claire was already asleep when Evelyn crept into their apartment. She was grateful for that. She wasn't ready to explain where she'd been or what she was doing. Wasn't ready to put words to the choice forming in her mind. She lay in bed, staring at her ceiling, and realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt oddly like relief. She'd already made her decision. The 7 days were just confirmation, just proof that what she felt after one night with Marco DeLuca was an illusion or desperation. She was going to say yes. She was going to step into his world in all its danger and complication. She was going to choose being seen over being safe. She just needed to be brave enough to admit it. The next 3 days blurred together in a succession of revelations that fundamentally altered how Evelyn understood power, loyalty, and the intricate machinery that kept a criminal empire running beneath the surface of legitimate society. Marco was true to his word. He showed her everything, held back nothing, let her see both the calculated businessman and the ruthless enforcer without apology or performance. On day 3, she sat beside him in a downtown office building where a tech entrepreneur named David Chen was pitching a cybersecurity startup. The presentation was polished, professional, full of graphs projecting exponential growth. Marco listened with apparent interest, asked intelligent questions about encryption protocols and market positioning, and at the end offered Chen a check for $500,000 in seed funding. In the elevator afterward, Evelyn turned to him. That was legitimate, completely legal investment. Yes and no, Marco said. The investment is legal. The reason I'm making it is because Chen's security software will eventually be used to protect my less legitimate operations. He doesn't know that yet. He thinks I'm just a venture capitalist diversifying my portfolio. But in 2 years, when his company is established and profitable, I'll suggest certain applications for his technology, and he'll agree because by then I'll own 40% of his company and have leverage he can't refuse. You're planning that far ahead? I'm always planning that far ahead. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage. Every legitimate business I invest in serves dual purposes. Every connection I make has multiple applications. I don't do anything for just one reason, Evelyn. That's how you build something that lasts. That afternoon, she witnessed the other side of his strategic thinking. They were in Marco's car, him driving for once, without security, through neighborhoods that grew progressively rougher. When his phone rang, he answered on speaker. "We have a problem." Vincent's voice was tight. "Johnny Mancini's been skimming about 40,000 over 6 months from the Southie protection collections." Marco's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw setting hard. "You're certain?" "Caught him on camera taking extra cash from Angelo's restaurant. Been doing it systematically. Angelo didn't report it because he was afraid of retaliation, but the son mentioned it to his girlfriend, and she works for us at the bakery on 3rd. "Where's Johnny now?" "At the warehouse." "Doesn't know we know. Sal's keeping him busy with inventory." Marco was silent for a moment, and Evelyn watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. Then he changed direction, heading toward the waterfront. "Keep him there. I'm 20 minutes out." He ended the call, and the silence in the car felt suffocating. Evelyn tried to read his expression, anger certainly, but also something that looked almost like disappointment. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "What I have to." Marco's voice was flat. "Johnny's been with me for 3 years. Good worker, reliable, never caused problems. But he got greedy, and worse, he made Angelo afraid to report it. That means he was using my reputation to extort more than agreed. That can't stand." "You're going to kill him." It wasn't a question. "No." Marco glanced at her. "I'm going to make an example. There's a difference. Johnny crossed a line, but it's not one that requires his death. If I killed everyone who skimmed a little extra, I'd have no organization left. But I can't let it go unanswered either, or everyone will think they can steal from me with impunity." They arrived at the warehouse to find Johnny Mancini in the office, a man in his late 20s with slicked back hair and a nervous energy that intensified when Marco walked in. Vincent stood by the door, his expression grim. Sal, another of Marco's men, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "Boss," Johnny said, standing quickly. "Didn't know you were coming by. Everything's good here, just finishing the inventory like Sal asked. Sit down, Johnny." Marco's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We need to talk." Something in that gentleness made Johnny pale. He sat slowly, his eyes darting between Marco and the other men. "If this is about the Moretti shipment being late, it's about $40,000, Marco interrupted. $40,000 that you took from my collections over the last 6 months. $40,000 that you made Angelo too afraid to report because you told him I'd shut him down if he complained about rates." Johnny's face went white. "Boss, I can explain." "Don't." Marco held up a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying. Vincent has video evidence. Angelo's son confirmed it. The only question now is what happens next." "Please." Johnny's voice cracked. "I've got debts, my sister's medical bills. I just needed—" "Everyone needs," Marco said. "Everyone has bills. Everyone has problems. That doesn't give you the right to steal from me and terrorize people under my protection." He leaned back against the desk. "You had options, Johnny. You could have come to me, asked for a loan, explained your situation. I've advanced money to people before when they had legitimate need. Instead, you stole, and worse, you used my name to intimidate someone who was paying me for protection from exactly that kind of treatment." Johnny was shaking now, his hands gripping the chair arms. "What are you going to do?" Marco pulled out his phone and made a call. "Angelo, it's Marco DeLuca. I'm calling about Johnny Mancini." He paused, listening. "Yes, I know. I want to apologize personally for putting you in that position. Johnny was acting outside his authority, and he's being dealt with. The money he took? I'm refunding it. Double. Call it compensation for the stress." Another pause. "No, your rates aren't changing. You've been a good client. This is my mistake for not catching it sooner." He ended the call and turned back to Johnny. "Here's what happens. You're giving back every penny you took, all 40,000. If you don't have it, you're working it off at 10,000 a month doing whatever I assign you. Could be loading docks, could be scrubbing toilets, I don't care. During those months, you get minimum wage, just enough to survive. No collections, no customer contact, nothing that requires trust." 4 months? Johnny's voice was small. "Plus interest." So make it 6 months. And Johnny, you're lucky it's only 6 months in manual labor. You understand why? Marco's voice hardened. Because despite stealing from me, you never put my people in actual danger. You never talked to cops, never sold information, never did anything that threatened the organization beyond taking money. You were stupid and greedy, but not malicious. That's the only reason you're walking out of here. Thank you. Johnny's relief was palpable. Thank you, boss. I swear I'll... One more thing. Marco's tone stopped him cold. The reason Angelo was afraid to report you, the reason his son's girlfriend felt she had to go through 3 people before it reached me, that tells me my protection system has holes. It tells me people don't trust they can come directly to me with problems. So I'm fixing that. He looked at Vincent. Set up a direct line, anonymous if people want. Anyone being extorted or mistreated by anyone in my organization can report it without fear. And Vincent, I want you personally investigating every claim. No filters, no protection for long-time employees. This doesn't happen again. Understood, Vincent said. Marco turned back to Johnny. Sal's going to drive you home. Tomorrow morning you start at the warehouse on Terminal Street, 6 a.m. Don't be late, and don't be stupid enough to run. There's nowhere in this city I can't find you. Johnny left, escorted by Sal, and the office fell silent. Marco poured himself a drink from a bottle he kept in the desk drawer, his movements controlled but tense. You didn't hurt him, Evelyn said carefully. Didn't need to. Johnny's not a threat, just desperate and foolish. Hurting him would have accomplished nothing except making me feel powerful, and I don't need that validation. Marco drank, then looked at her. But make no mistake. If he'd been selling information, if he'd endangered anyone, if he'd shown even a hint of disloyalty to the organization itself, this would have ended very differently. I have mercy for weakness. I have none for betrayal. Where's the line? Evelyn asked. Between weakness and betrayal. Intent, Marco said simply. Johnny intended to steal money. That's greed. That's weakness. If he'd intended to destroy what I've built, if he'd been working with rivals or law enforcement, that's betrayal. One gets punishment and a chance at redemption. The other gets elimination. They left the warehouse as dusk settled over the waterfront, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Marco drove them to the north end, to a small Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and tomato sauce thick in the air. The owner, an elderly woman named Rosa, greeted Marco with a kiss on both cheeks and seated them at a corner table with a view of the street. Rosa's family has owned this place for 60 years, Marco said as they settled in. I've been eating here since I was a kid. My mother used to bring me here on Sundays after church. You went to church? Evelyn couldn't help the surprise in her voice. My mother was devout, believed in God, forgiveness, all of it. She'd be horrified by what I've become. Marco studied the menu, though he clearly already knew what he wanted. But she also believed in protecting family, in doing whatever necessary to survive. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my father's injury. Cleaned houses, waitressed, did alterations. Wore herself down to nothing so I could have opportunities. When she got sick and couldn't work anymore, she refused treatment at first because of the cost. Said she'd rather die than burden us with debt. But you made her get treatment anyway, Evelyn guessed. I begged her, promised her I'd handle the money, that she didn't need to worry. She agreed on the condition that I finish college first, get my degree before dealing with her bills. So I did. Graduated summa cum laude while she was in chemotherapy, got job offers from 3 architecture firms. Marco's voice was distant, lost in memory. And then the cancer metastasized. The experimental treatments insurance wouldn't cover became the only option. The bills went from manageable to catastrophic, and I realized legal architecture would never save her. Rosa appeared with wine and bread, chattering in rapid Italian about her grandson's upcoming wedding. Marco responded fluently, his entire demeanor softening in a way Evelyn had never seen. When Rosa left, he poured the wine. This is who I would have been, he said quietly. Without the debt, without my mother's death, without the empire. Just a man who designs buildings and eats at Rosa's on Sunday nights and argues about architecture with anyone who'll listen. Sometimes I wonder if that version of me would have been happier. Would he? Evelyn asked. Marco considered the question seriously. No, because he would have been powerless. He would have watched his mother die, knowing he couldn't save her. He would have spent his life designing buildings for other people's visions, following other people's rules, accepting other people's definitions of success. This version of me, the one who built an empire, he saved his father from bankruptcy. He provides insulin to diabetics who can't afford it legally. He keeps neighborhoods safe when police can't or won't. He has power to change things. Marco met her eyes. But he also has blood on his hands, and enemies who want him dead, and the constant knowledge that everything could collapse if he shows weakness for even a moment. So you tell me, Evelyn, which version is better? I don't think it works that way, Evelyn said slowly. You're not two different people. You're one person who made impossible choices and lives with the consequences. The architect and the crime boss aren't separate. They're both you. Something shifted in Marco's expression, a vulnerability she was beginning to recognize. You're the first person who's ever said that. Everyone else wants me to be one thing or the other, the monster or the misunderstood anti-hero. But you see the whole picture. Their food arrived. Homemade ravioli and sauce that tasted like childhood and comfort, crusty bread still warm from the oven, salad dressed in oil and vinegar. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the restaurant filling up around them with families and couples and the beautiful ordinary chaos of a neighborhood institution. Tell me about your writing, Marco said eventually. You've spent 4 days learning about my world. I know almost nothing about yours beyond what a background check revealed. Evelyn felt herself tense. There's not much to tell. I write articles that don't sell and short stories that get rejected and dream about publishing a novel someday if I can ever figure out what story I want to tell. What do you write about? People who don't fit, who exist in the spaces between what society expects and who they actually are. But she pushed ravioli around her plate. I wrote a story once about a woman who worked as a cleaner in an office building. Everyone who worked there ignored her, walked past her like she was furniture, had conversations in front of her like she wasn't even there. But she was actually brilliant, spoke 4 languages, had a doctorate in literature. She'd lost everything in a divorce and was rebuilding from nothing, and nobody saw her. They just saw the cleaning uniform. What happened to her? Marco asked. She started leaving notes, tiny corrections to the work she saw in the trash bins and on desks, grammar errors, logical flaws in arguments, better solutions to problems. At first, people thought they had a ghost. Then they realized it was the cleaner. Some of them got angry. How dare she presume to critique them? But one person, a junior analyst, started leaving her questions deliberately, problems he couldn't solve. And she'd leave answers. Eventually, he advocated for hiring her in an actual position, but she turned it down. Why? Evelyn smiled slightly, because she realized that being invisible gave her power. She could see how the whole company operated, understand power structures and relationships, gather information nobody guarded around her. She built a consulting business based on that intelligence, made more money advising competitors than she ever could have earned working there legitimately. That's your story? Marco's eyes were intent. The invisible woman who finds power in being overlooked? It got rejected 17 times. Editors said it was implausible, that the premise didn't work, that nobody would believe someone could remain invisible that long or leverage it that effectively. Evelyn's voice was bitter. They couldn't imagine it because they've never been invisible. They've never felt what it's like to be in a room where nobody sees you. I'd like to read it, Marco said. The story, if you're willing to share it. The request caught her off guard. You actually want to read my writing? I want to understand how you see the world. Your writing is that window. Marco reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Everything I've shown you this week has been about letting you see me clearly. I'd like the same courtesy. That night, in her apartment while Claire slept, Evelyn emailed Marco the story. And then, because the dam had broken, she sent him 3 more. Stories about people existing in gray areas, making impossible choices, finding humanity in dark places. Stories that suddenly felt less like fiction and more like prophecy. Day 5 brought violence, sudden and brutal in the way Marco had warned her about. They were at a construction site, one of Marco's legitimate real estate developments, meeting with the site foreman about delays. The conversation was routine, almost boring, until a black SUV screeched into the lot and 4 men emerged with weapons. Everything happened so fast that Evelyn's mind struggled to process it. Marco's hand locked around her wrist, yanking her behind a concrete barrier as gunfire erupted. Vincent appeared from nowhere, returning fire with a handgun that seemed too large to be real. The construction workers scattered, screaming, glass shattered, metal pinged against steel beams. Marco's body covered hers, pressing her flat against cold concrete, his weight protecting her from the bullets that chewed through the site office and shattered equipment. She could smell gunpowder and his cologne and her own fear. His heart hammered against her back, steady despite the chaos. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice absolutely calm. "Don't move, don't look up, just breathe." More gunfire, shouting in Italian, the screech of tires, then silence, ringing and absolute. Marco pulled back slightly, checking her for injuries with quick, efficient hands. "Are you hurt? Did anything hit you?" Evelyn shook her head, unable to form words. Her entire body was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system in waves that made her vision blur at the edges. "Vincent," Marco called out. "I'm good, boss. They're gone. Hit 2 of them, but they dragged their wounded into the SUV and took off. Jersey plates, probably stolen." Marco helped Evelyn to her feet, his hands steady on her arms. "Look at me," he said firmly. "Evelyn, look at me." She focused on his face, a small cut on his cheek from flying debris, but otherwise unharmed. His eyes were dark and intense, holding her gaze like an anchor. "You're safe," he said. "You're safe, and I'm safe. And it's over. Just breathe." "They tried to kill you." Her voice came out raw. They came here to kill you." "They came here to send a message," Marco corrected. "If they'd wanted me dead, they would have used better shooters. This was intimidation, a warning from someone who thinks they can scare me into concessions." His jaw tightened. They chose poorly. Police arrived within minutes, too many of them for this to be normal response time, which suggested someone had called before the shooting started. Marco spoke with the detectives with absolute composure, giving statements that were technically truthful but revealed nothing useful. Construction site robbery gone wrong, random violence. No, he didn't recognize the attackers. Yes, he'd cooperate with any investigation. The detective, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, clearly didn't believe a word of it, but she also clearly knew better than to push. She took their statements, collected evidence, and left with a warning to, "Be careful, Mr. DeLuca." Only when the police were gone, when the construction workers had been sent home and the site secured, did Marco's composure crack slightly. He paced the length of the site office, his movements tense with barely controlled fury. "The Moretti family," Vincent said. "Has to be. The timing, the location, the message. It's their style. And we've been cutting into their shipping operations for months. Find out for certain," Marco ordered, but quietly. "No retaliation until we're absolutely sure who ordered it. And Vincent? Double security on all my properties. Triple it on my house and Evelyn's apartment." "My apartment?" Evelyn's voice was sharp. "Why my apartment?" Marco turned to her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Fear, raw and undisguised. "Because they saw you. They saw me protecting you. And if they're smart, they've already started researching who you are and how they can use you against me. Welcome to the reality of being associated with Marco DeLuca, Evelyn. You just became a target." The weight of that settled over her like a physical thing. She'd understood intellectually that being with Marco meant danger, but understanding and experiencing were entirely different. Those bullets had been real. The men with weapons had been real, and the threat to her wasn't hypothetical anymore. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "Vincent will drive you. I'm putting a security detail on your building." "No." Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "I want to go home to process this, but I'm not running. I'm not ending the 7 days early. I said I wanted to see everything, and this is part of everything, but I need a few hours to breathe." Something like respect flickered across Marco's face. "Vincent drives you. Security watches the building from a distance. They won't approach unless there's a threat. And tomorrow, if you still want to continue, I'll pick you up myself. But Evelyn, if you want to walk away now, I'll understand. This is more than I should have asked anyone to witness." "Tomorrow," Evelyn confirmed. "Pick me up tomorrow." The drive home was silent. Evelyn stared out the window, seeing the attack play over and over in her mind. The casual brutality of it, The way Marco's body had covered hers without hesitation, the absolute calm in his voice while bullets flew around them. Claire was at work when Evelyn entered the apartment, which was a mercy. She took a shower so hot it turned her skin pink, washing away the smell of gunpowder and fear. Then she sat on her bed and finally let herself cry. Not from terror, though she'd been terrified, but from the overwhelming realization of what she was choosing. This was Marco's world. Violence and danger, and the constant knowledge that someone might try to kill you for business reasons. This was what it meant to be his, to stand at his side, to accept what he offered. And the terrifying part wasn't that she wanted to run away. The terrifying part was that she still wanted to stay. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I read your stories. The invisible woman found power in being overlooked. You find truth in spaces most people ignore. You'd have made an extraordinary journalist if the world had let you." M. A second text followed immediately. "If you decide tomorrow that this is too much, I'll understand. But I hope you don't. I hope you're brave enough to see all 7 days. Because I think you're the first person who might actually understand why I built this empire and what it costs to maintain it." Evelyn stared at the messages for a long time. Then she typed a reply. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. I'll be ready." His response came within seconds. "Tomorrow." And Evelyn? "Thank you for not running today." Most people would have. She fell asleep with her phone in her hand, Marco's words the last thing she read, and dreamed of bullets and concrete and the weight of his body protecting hers while the world exploded around them. Day 6 began with a knock on her door at 7:30. Evelyn opened it to find Marco himself standing in the hallway, not Vincent, not a driver. Marco, in jeans and a sweater, looking almost normal except for the alertness in his eyes and the way he scanned the hallway before meeting her gaze. "I said I'd pick you up myself," he said simply. "Ready?" Evelyn grabbed her coat. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe. Somewhere I can show you what this all means without guns or negotiations or performances." Marco offered his hand. "I want to show you what I'm actually building, Evelyn. Not the empire or the illegal operations or the territory. The legacy." They drove north, out of the city, into suburbs that gradually gave way to rural Massachusetts. An hour from Boston, Marco turned down a private drive that led to a property under construction. Not luxury condos or commercial real estate, but something entirely different. A community center, medical clinic, after-school programs, housing for low-income families, all built with clean lines and thoughtful architecture, all designed with the same care Marco brought to his luxury developments. "This is where the money goes," Marco said as they walked the construction site. "Not all of it. I'm not a saint, and I do take profit. But a percentage of everything I earn, legal and illegal, gets funneled here. To projects like this, places that serve people the system ignores." Evelyn stared at the half-built structures, understanding dawning. "This is your architecture, your designs." "Everything I never got to build professionally." Marco's voice was quiet. "I hire real architects to handle the technical work and permits, but the concepts, the designs, the vision, that's mine. This is what I meant when I said I wanted to build something that lasts. Not just warehouses and shipping routes, but actual good, actual help for people who need it." "Why hide it?" Evelyn asked. "Why not publicize this? Use it to show you're not just a criminal. Because the moment I publicize it, it becomes about me instead of about them. It becomes PR instead of genuine help. And because the people I serve don't care about my reputation, they care about having a doctor who doesn't charge $300 for a visit, or affordable housing that doesn't come with rats and broken heat, or a safe place for their kids after school." Marco gestured to the buildings. "This is selfish, Evelyn. Don't mistake it for altruism. I'm building this because I need to believe I'm more than just a criminal. Because my mother's memory deserves better than just her son who built an empire on broken laws." They spent hours there, Marco explaining every design choice, every accommodation for accessibility, every element meant to serve rather than impress. Evelyn watched him transform, the crime boss falling away to reveal the architect he'd never gotten to be. The builder who understood that real power wasn't control over territory, but the ability to create spaces where people could thrive. This is what I'm offering you, Marco said, as they stood in what would become the medical clinic's lobby. Not just money or security or protection from your debts, but this purpose, the chance to be part of building something that matters. I need someone who can tell these stories, who can document what we're doing, who can ensure that long after I'm gone, this legacy continues. Someone who sees the whole picture, the crime and the architecture, the violence and the healing, and can hold both truths at once. You want me to be your chronicler, Evelyn realized. To write the truth about Marco De Luca. I want you to be my partner, Marco corrected. In everything, the empire and the legacy, the darkness and the light. Someone who chooses this with full knowledge of what it costs and what it creates. Someone who's brave enough to stand in the gray areas with me. Evelyn looked at the construction around them, at the vision taking shape in steel and concrete, and felt something settle into place in her chest. This was the missing piece. This was why Marco had spent 7 days showing her everything, not to seduce her or intimidate her, but to give her the complete truth so she could make an informed choice. "One more day," she said. "You promised me 7 days. I want to see all of it before I answer." Marco nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tomorrow, the 7th day. I'll show you the cost, the real cost. And then you decide." The 7th day began with a phone call at 3 in the morning. Evelyn jolted awake to her cell vibrating against her nightstand, Marco's name illuminated on the screen. She answered with her heart already racing, knowing that nothing good happened at this hour. "Get dressed," Marco said without preamble. "Warm clothes, comfortable shoes, Vincent's outside. I need you to see something, and it can't wait for morning." "What happened?" Sleep fell away instantly, replaced by the sharp clarity of adrenaline. "The cost I promised to show you. It's happening now." His voice was tight, controlled in that way she'd learned meant he was containing fury. "This is your last chance to walk away, Evelyn. Once you see this, once you understand what I'm capable of, when someone crosses the final line, there's no unknowing it. You can stay in bed, tell Vincent to leave, and we'll pretend these 7 days never happened. Or you can get in that car and see exactly who Marco De Luca becomes when loyalty is betrayed." Evelyn was already pulling on jeans, her phone wedged between shoulder and ear. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." She threw on layers against the November cold, sweater, jacket, boots, and was out the door in 4. Vincent waited by a black sedan, his expression grim in the pre-dawn darkness. He opened the door without a word, and Evelyn slid into the back seat to find it empty. No Marco, just her and Vincent and the weight of whatever was coming. They drove in silence through Boston's sleeping streets, heading toward the waterfront. The city looked different at this hour, stripped of its daytime pretense, raw and honest in its emptiness. Vincent navigated through industrial areas until they reached a warehouse Evelyn didn't recognize, isolated at the end of a pier with water on 3 sides and only one road in or out. Security was heavy, men she recognized from Marco's detail stationed at intervals, all armed, all alert. Vincent led her inside through a side entrance, down a corridor that smelled of salt water and diesel, into a large open space that had been cleared of everything except a single chair bolted to the floor in the center. Marco stood 20 feet from that chair, his back to her, his posture rigid. He wore all black, tactical clothing that emphasized function over style, so different from his usual tailored elegance that it transformed him into someone else entirely, or perhaps revealed who he'd always been beneath the expensive suits. In the chair sat a man Evelyn didn't recognize. Mid-40s, average build, wearing clothes that had once been expensive but were now disheveled and stained. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, lips split. Zip ties secured his wrists and ankles to the chair. He was crying silently, tears cutting tracks through the blood on his face. "Her name was Sarah Chen," Marco said, without turning around, his voice carrying clearly in the warehouse's acoustics. She was 19 years old, studying computer science at MIT, working part-time at her father's restaurant in Cambridge to help with tuition. 3 nights ago, she was walking home from her shift when someone grabbed her off the street, dragged her into an alley, assaulted her, beat her badly enough that she's currently in Massachusetts General with a fractured skull and internal bleeding. Evelyn's stomach turned. The man in the chair made a sound, half whimper, half denial. "Sarah's father, David Chen, is the tech entrepreneur I invested in," Marco continued. The one you met on day 3. Good man, smart, building something legitimate. He came to me yesterday because the police told him they had a suspect but not enough evidence. Security camera footage was too grainy. No DNA evidence. Sarah was so traumatized she couldn't give a clear identification. The system was failing her. Marco finally turned, and Evelyn saw his face, cold, empty of everything except a fury so profound it had frozen into ice. So David asked me for help, asked if my resources could do what the police couldn't. And they could. I didn't. The man in the chair started, but Marco cut him off with a gesture. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't insult me with denials. I have the security footage my people cleaned up. I have your DNA from under her fingernails that my lab processed. I have testimony from 3 witnesses who saw you following her from the restaurant. I have proof the police would never find because they don't have my resources or my motivation. Marco walked slowly toward the chair. Your name is Robert Hastings. You're a financial analyst. You're married with 2 children. And 3 nights ago, you destroyed a 19-year-old girl's life because you could, because you wanted to, because you thought you'd get away with it. Please, Hastings whispered. Please, I have a family. Sarah Chen had a family, Marco said softly. She had a father who worked 18-hour days to give her opportunities. She had dreams of working in cybersecurity, of making a difference. She had a whole life ahead of her. What you did to her, what you took from her, can never be repaired. She'll carry that trauma forever. So tell me, Robert Hastings, why should your family matter more than hers? Evelyn stood frozen, understanding with horrible clarity what she was witnessing. This was the cost Marco had promised to show her, not the violence of business disputes or territory wars, but the violence of justice, the kind that fell outside legal systems, that happened in warehouses at 3 a.m, that left no record and no witnesses except those who'd chosen to be there. Marco, she heard herself say, her voice barely audible. He turned to look at her, and for a moment she saw the struggle in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to send her away, to protect her from this, warring with the part that needed her to see all of him, even this, especially this. Last chance, he said to her. You can leave. Vincent will drive you home. This doesn't touch you. You never saw this, never knew about it. You can still walk away clean. Evelyn thought about Sarah Chen, 19 years old and broken in a hospital bed. She thought about the police report that would go nowhere, the evidence that wasn't quite enough, the legal system that would fail because it had rules and procedures and requirements that protected men like Robert Hastings. She thought about justice and law and the space between them where people like Marco operated. I'm staying, she said. Something shifted in Marco's expression, relief or resignation or perhaps both. He nodded once, then turned back to Hastings. Here's what's going to happen, Marco said, his voice returning to that cold, controlled calm. You're going to confess. Not to me. I already know what you did. You're going to confess on video, in detail, everything you did to Sarah Chen. That confession will be delivered to the police anonymously. It will be enough to convict you because you'll include details only the attacker would know. And if I don't? Hastings' voice shook. Then I make you, Marco said simply. I have people very skilled at extracting confessions. It won't be pleasant, or you can do this the easy way. Confess, face legal consequences, and live. That's the deal. That's the only mercy you're getting. I'll say I was coerced, Hastings said desperately. Any lawyer will get it thrown out. Feel free to try. Marco's smile was terrible. But you'll notice I'm not touching you. I'm simply having a conversation. And the video will show a man confessing freely, without physical coercion. What happens after you confess? How you explain it to your lawyers and your wife and your children, that's your problem. But Robert Hastings, you will confess to what you did, or you won't leave this warehouse walking. Vincent set up a camera on a tripod, professional equipment that would record high-quality video and audio. Marco stepped back, giving Hastings clear frame, and nodded. It took 30 minutes. Hastings tried to resist, tried to negotiate, tried to find a way out that didn't exist. But Marco's patience was infinite and absolute. He simply waited, letting the silence and the situation and Hastings' own fear do the work. Finally, broken and sobbing, Hastings confessed. He described the assault in horrifying detail, admitted to following Sarah from the restaurant, acknowledged that she'd fought and he'd overpowered her. Every word was captured in high definition. When it was finished, Marco turned off the camera. Vincent, call Detective Morrison at BPD. Anonymous tip about Robert Hastings. Make sure they find him somewhere public, somewhere that won't raise questions about how he ended up there. And get that video to the news stations. I want this conviction airtight. What about him? Vincent gestured to Hastings. Clean him up. Leave him on the steps of his own house with his wallet and keys and no memory of how he got there. Let him wake up tomorrow and spend the rest of his life wondering if this was real or a nightmare, right up until the police knock on his door with an arrest warrant. Marco's voice was empty of emotion. He gets to face legal justice. That's more mercy than he deserves. Hastings was removed by two of Marco's men, still crying, still protesting. The warehouse emptied quickly until only Marco and Evelyn remained in the vast space, the chair sitting empty like an accusation. This is what I am, Marco said into the silence. When the law fails, when the system protects predators, when people come to me because there's nowhere else to go, this is what I do. I extract justice outside legal channels. I use fear and force and resources the police don't have to make things right in ways the courts never could. He turned to face her. I've done this 17 times in 15 years. Different situations, different crimes, but always the same pattern. Someone fails the system. The victim or their family comes to me. I find the truth, enforce accountability. You could have just killed him, Evelyn said quietly. Why the confession? Why involve the police at all? Because killing him would be easy. It would be satisfying. But it wouldn't help Sarah Chen. Marco's jaw tightened. She deserves to see him in court. She deserves to watch him be convicted legally, to have the system acknowledge what he did even if my methods started the process. And she deserves to know that sometimes, even when official justice fails, someone cares enough to make sure predators don't walk free. You're playing judge and jury, Evelyn said. Yes. No apology, no justification. I'm doing what needs to be done when the actual judges and juries fail. Is it legal? No. Is it right? I don't know, but it's necessary, and I won't apologize for protecting people the system abandons. Evelyn walked to the empty chair, touching its cold metal surface. 7 days ago, she'd been a struggling writer drowning in debt, invisible to everyone around her. Now she stood in a warehouse at dawn, having witnessed extrajudicial justice, understanding that the man offering her everything was capable of this, capable of torture if necessary, capable of extracting confessions through fear, capable of operating entirely outside the law when he believed the cause was just. The 7 days are over, Marco said behind her. You've seen everything. The legitimate business and the criminal empire, the architecture and the violence, the community centers and the warehouses where I make people confess to crimes. You know what I offer and what it costs. You know who I am when the masks come off. His voice was rough. So decide, Evelyn Moore. All in or walk away. But decide now, and mean it. Evelyn turned to face him, this complicated, dangerous man who'd shown her truth without flinching. You said I could leave any time, that the moment I wanted out, you'd let me go. Yes, Marco confirmed. No consequences, no retaliation, just gone. You walk out of here and I never contact you again. And if I stay, what exactly am I agreeing to? Everything. Marco moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of what he'd just done. You'd be mine. Publicly, visibly mine. You'd live in an apartment I provide, safe, secure, in a building I control. Your debts disappear. Your car is paid off. Your student loans are resolved. You'd have time and space to write, to build your career. But in exchange, you attend events with me. You're present when I need you. You help document the legitimate work, the community centers, the housing projects, the legacy I'm building. You tell the truth about who I am to the people who need to understand that I'm more than just a criminal. And the relationship? Evelyn pressed. You said there would be expectations of intimacy. I want you in my bed, Marco said bluntly. I want exclusivity. You don't sleep with anyone else, and neither do I. I want you in my home, in my life, as my partner in every sense. But Evelyn, I won't force it. If you need time before we're physically intimate, I'll give you time. If you want separate bedrooms initially, that's fine. This isn't about buying access to your body. It's about building something real with someone who sees me clearly. What if I change my mind? Evelyn asked. What if 6 months from now I decide I can't live with what you do? Then you tell me, and you leave. Marco's voice was firm. I won't hold you hostage. The debts I've paid stay paid. I won't use them as leverage. The apartment remains yours for a year after we separate, so you have time to stabilize. I'm not building a prison, Evelyn. I'm offering a partnership. And partnerships require both people choosing to stay. Evelyn studied his face, reading the sincerity there, but also the fear. He was afraid she'd say no. This powerful, dangerous man who'd just extracted a confession through psychological warfare was afraid that she'd reject him. I have conditions, she said carefully. Hope flickered in Marco's eyes. Name them. I keep my independence. I write what I want, pursue my own career, make my own choices. I'm not your possession or your accessory. I'm your partner, which means equal say in decisions that affect me. Agreed. No hesitation. I don't participate in the illegal operations. I can know about them. I can be aware of what you're doing, but I'm not helping plan crimes or executing them. That line is non-negotiable. Agreed. Marco nodded. I'd never ask you to compromise yourself that way. And if I ever feel unsafe, if I ever believe you're becoming someone I can't be with, I can leave immediately without argument or negotiation. You don't get to convince me to stay. You don't get to negotiate. I say I'm done, and it's done. Agreed. Marco's voice was quiet. Anything else? Evelyn took a breath, steadying herself for what came next. I want honesty, complete honesty. No secrets about your operations, no hiding things to protect me. If I'm choosing this, I'm choosing all of it. That means you trust me enough to tell me everything. That's dangerous, Marco said. The more you know, the more liability you become. If anyone ever got to you, tried to make you talk, then you'll have to trust that I won't break, Evelyn interrupted. You said you needed someone honest, someone real. That requires trust, Marco. Complete trust. So either you give me that, or this doesn't work. Marco was silent for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the decision. Finally, he nodded. Complete honesty. No secrets. You'll know everything. The legitimate operations, the illegal ones, the finances, the enemies, all of it. But Evelyn, if this goes wrong, if you're ever in danger because of what you know, then we deal with it together, Evelyn finished. As partners. Not as you protecting your fragile possession, but as equals facing whatever comes. Is that a yes? Marco asked carefully. Are you saying yes to this? Evelyn thought about the past 7 days. The ballroom where he'd first approached her. The warehouse inspection and the Calabrese negotiation. The community center that proved he was building more than an empire. The confession she'd just witnessed that showed how far he'd go for justice when the system failed. She thought about Sarah Chen in her hospital bed and Robert Hastings, who would face legal consequences because Marco had resources the police didn't. She thought about her apartment with its eviction notices and her student loans that strangled her dreams and the crushing weight of invisibility. She thought about being seen, really, truly seen by someone who understood complexity, who existed in gray areas, who built architecture and extracted confessions with equal skill. Someone who was offering her not salvation but partnership, not rescue but choice. Yes, Evelyn said. I'm saying yes. All in, no reservations. I choose this. I choose you. The transformation in Marco's expression was remarkable. The control cracking to reveal relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd just seen him do. Say it again, he demanded. I need to hear it again. I choose this, Evelyn repeated. I choose you, with my eyes open, with full knowledge, with complete awareness of what it costs and what it creates. I choose us. Marco kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd expected. Not possessive or demanding, but almost reverent, as if she were something precious, something he'd been afraid to break. His hands trembled slightly against her face, and she realized with a start that he was shaking. This man who'd stood unmoved while extracting a confession was shaking because she'd said yes. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "I won't let you regret this," he said fiercely. "I'll give you everything I promised and more. I'll protect you, provide for you, build a life with you that's worth the compromises you're making." "I'm not making compromises," Evelyn corrected. "I'm making choices. There's a difference." She pulled back to look at him properly. "When do we start?" "Now." Marco's voice was rough with emotion. "Right now. Vincent will drive you home to pack what you need. I'll have movers handle the rest tomorrow. Your apartment, the one I'm providing, it's in the building I showed you on day 2, top floor, city views, security in the lobby. It's been ready since day 3. You were that confident I'd say yes? No." Marco's smile was self-deprecating. "I was that hopeful, and that prepared for either outcome. If you'd said no, the apartment would have gone to someone else on my payroll, but I wanted it ready in case you chose me." They left the warehouse as dawn broke properly over Boston, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Vincent drove them to Evelyn's apartment in Somerville, where Claire was just waking up for an early shift. Evelyn packed quickly while Marco waited in the car, clothes, laptop, the few personal items that mattered. Everything else could be sorted later. Claire appeared in her doorway, coffee in hand, eyes wide. "Are you moving out? What's happening?" "I got a job," Evelyn said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Live-in position, good pay, immediate start. I'll cover my share of rent through the end of the lease, but I need to go now." "With Marco DeLuca," Claire guessed. "The research assistant position. God, Evie, you're really doing this? You barely know him." "I know him well enough," Evelyn said firmly. "And this is what I want. Trust me, Claire. For once in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing." She hugged her roommate goodbye, promising to stay in touch, and carried her bags down to where Marco waited. He took them from her without comment, loading them into the trunk with the same care he brought to everything he did. The drive to her new apartment took 20 minutes. The building was exactly as Marco had described. Modern, secure, with a doorman who greeted Marco by name and looked at Evelyn with poorly disguised curiosity. The elevator required a key card to access the top floor, where only 2 apartments existed. Marco used his card, and the doors opened directly into a foyer. The apartment beyond was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, an open-plan living space with kitchen and dining area. Hardwood floors, modern furniture, art on the walls that looked original rather than mass-produced. 2 bedrooms, a master with an ensuite bathroom, and a second that had been converted into an office with a desk, bookshelves, and a view that would make writing feel like flying. "This is yours," Marco said, setting her bags down. "Your space. I have the apartment next door. Through that connecting door if you want it open, or locked from your side if you want privacy. I'll stay in my place until you invite me into yours. No pressure, no expectations. This is your home first, ours second." Evelyn walked to the windows, looking out at Boston spread before her like a promise. She could see the waterfront where Marco's warehouses stood, the north end where they'd eaten at Rosa's restaurant, the financial district where legitimate business happened, all of it laid out, visible, no longer hidden or forbidden. "What happens now?" she asked. Marco came to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Now we build something real. Now you write and I manage the empire, and we figure out what partnership looks like when both people are complicated and difficult and committed to honesty. Now we attend events together and face down enemies together and create the kind of legacy that outlasts us both." He turned to face her. "Now we choose each other every day, not because we're obligated, but because we want to, because what we're building is worth the cost." "I'm terrified," Evelyn admitted. "Good," Marco said. "I'd worry if you weren't. Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you're making this choice with your eyes open." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I'm terrified too, if it helps. I've built an empire and faced down rivals and survived attempts on my life, but trusting someone completely? Letting someone see all of me? That's more frightening than any enemy." They stood at the window as morning light filled the apartment. 2 complicated people who'd found each other across a ballroom and decided to build something together in the gray areas between legal and illegal, right and wrong, safety and danger. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a rescue. It was a choice, made freely, with full knowledge of the cost and the potential. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Moore felt seen, not as invisible background, not as potential conquest, not as someone to be dismissed or pitied, but as an equal, a partner, someone whose choice mattered because she'd been given all the information and chosen anyway. "Show me your apartment," she said suddenly. "The one next door. I want to see how you live when you're not performing." Marco's surprise showed for just a moment before he led her to the connecting door, unlocking it to reveal his space. It was similar to hers in layout, but different in character. Darker furniture, more books, architectural models displayed on shelves. A drafting table by the window with sketches scattered across its surface. Photos of his mother and father on one wall. The community center plans pinned up like art. "This is who I am without the empire," Marco said quietly. The architect who never was. The son who still misses his parents. The builder who dreams of creating things that last beyond himself. He gestured to the sketches. "I work on these at night when I can't sleep. Designs for buildings I'll never build professionally. Museums, libraries, schools, legacy projects that exist only in my imagination." Evelyn studied the sketches. They were beautiful, sophisticated, showing real talent and vision. "Why only in your imagination? You have the money to build these." "Because building them would require revealing who designed them. And the moment my name is attached to legitimate architecture, every project becomes suspect. Every permit gets scrutinized. The empire I've built makes it impossible to be the architect I wanted to be." Marco's voice held old grief. "That's the real cost, Evelyn. Not the danger or the violence or the legal risk, but the knowledge that I'll never get to be both people fully. The criminal empire feeds the architectural dreams, but it also prevents them from ever becoming public reality." "What if they didn't have to be public?" Evelyn said slowly. "What if the community center and the housing projects are enough? What if legacy doesn't require recognition, just impact?" Marco looked at her with something like wonder. "You understand." "I understand choosing between who you want to be and who circumstances made you," Evelyn said. "I understand building something meaningful even if no one knows you built it. I understand that sometimes the work matters more than the credit." She took his hand. "And I understand that we're both trying to create things that last. You with architecture, me with words. Maybe that's why this works. We're both builders in our own way." "Partners in creation," Marco said softly. "I like that." They spent the rest of the day in the apartments, Marco working on his sketches while Evelyn unpacked and set up her office. It felt domestic in a way that should have been strange, but instead felt natural. Comfortable. Like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. In the evening, Marco ordered dinner from Rosa's. She delivered personally, kissing his cheeks and studying Evelyn with shrewd, knowing eyes before pronouncing her good for him in Italian that Evelyn was clearly meant to understand. They ate at the table overlooking the city, and Marco told her stories about growing up in the North End, about his mother's cooking and his father's pride when he'd gotten into architecture school. "My father died 2 years after my mother," Marco said. "Heart attack. The doctor said it was genetic, but I think it was broken heart syndrome. He never recovered from losing her, spent his last 2 years existing rather than living, going through motions while waiting to join her." Marco's voice was distant. "I was already building the empire by then, already making money illegally to pay off debts. He knew what I was doing, never said a word against it, just looked at me with these sad eyes like he was watching me become someone he didn't recognize." "Did you talk about it?" Evelyn asked gently. "Once, a week before he died. He said, 'Your mother would be proud that you survived, but devastated by how you did it. Find a way to be both, Marco. The survivor and the good man. Don't let the empire consume the person you were supposed to be.'" Marco's jaw tightened. "I've been trying to balance that ever since. The community centers, the medical supplies, the justice for people like Sarah Chen, that's me trying to be both. The survivor who built power, and the good man who uses it for something beyond profit." "I think you're succeeding," Evelyn said. "It's messy and complicated and morally gray, but you're succeeding. You're both people at once. Marco reached across the table, taking her hand. Help me stay that way. Help me remember why I built this. Help me make sure the power serves purpose rather than just feeding itself. That's what I need from you more than anything else. Someone who sees both sides and won't let me lose sight of either. I can do that, Evelyn promised, as long as you help me be brave enough to write the truth, to tell stories that matter even if they make people uncomfortable, to use my words for something bigger than just my own success. Deal, Marco said. We build each other up. We keep each other honest. We create legacy together. They clinked wine glasses on it, sealing the agreement with a gesture that felt more binding than any legal contract. This was their foundation: honesty, partnership, mutual creation. Everything else would flow from these principles. That night, Evelyn slept in her new bedroom with its city views and comfortable bed, the connecting door to Marco's apartment unlocked but not opened. She could hear him moving around in his space, the sound of water running, music playing softly, the comfortable sounds of someone settling in for the night. It was intimate without being intrusive, present without being demanding. She fell asleep feeling safe for the first time in years, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and complications, but also knowing she wasn't facing them alone anymore. She'd made her choice. She'd said yes. And whatever came next, they would handle it together. In the gray areas between right and wrong, between legal and illegal, between safety and danger, Evelyn Moore and Marco DeLuca had found each other. And they were building something that might just last. 3 months passed in a rhythm that felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. Evelyn settled into her new life with Marco like stepping into water. Initial shock giving way to adjustment, then comfort, then the realization that she couldn't imagine existing any other way. The apartment became truly hers as she filled the office with books and plants, as her writing spread across the desk in organized chaos, as morning coffee at the window watching the city wake became ritual rather than novelty. Marco kept his promise about the connecting door. He never pushed, never demanded, never assumed access to her space was his right. Some nights they cooked dinner together in his kitchen, talking about architecture and story structure and the weird parallel between building empires and building narratives. Other nights they stayed separate, comfortable in their independence, knowing the other person was close but respecting the boundary. The physical intimacy came gradually, naturally, without the transaction she'd half feared. A kiss goodnight that lingered, his hand at the small of her back becoming familiar, wanted. The night she'd fallen asleep on his couch reading architectural journals and woke to find him carrying her to bed, tucking her in with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Small moments accumulating until the night she knocked on the connecting door and asked, "Can I stay with you tonight?" And he'd simply opened his arms in answer. Making love with Marco was revelation and confirmation in equal measure. He approached it the way he approached everything, with absolute focus, careful attention to detail, genuine interest in her pleasure as much as his own. But beneath the skill was vulnerability, the same fear she'd seen in the warehouse when he'd waited for her answer, the fear that she'd see him completely and decide he wasn't worth the complexity. Afterward, lying in his bed with city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, Evelyn had traced the scar along his ribs, knife wound from 5 years ago, he'd explained, territory dispute that got personal, and said, "I'm not going anywhere. You know that, right? I chose this. I choose you. Every day." Marco had pulled her closer, his voice rough. "Every day I expect you to wake up and realize you made a mistake, that you could have anyone, anything, and you're stuck with a criminal who operates in shadows." "I don't want anyone or anything else," Evelyn had replied firmly. "I want the criminal who builds community centers. I want the architect who extracts confessions. I want all of you, Marco, the light and the dark and everything between." But 3 months of domestic comfort couldn't erase the reality of what Marco was, what his world demanded. The first real test came on a Tuesday in February, when Vincent called Marco's cell during breakfast, and the conversation that followed made Marco's expression go cold and dangerous. "Problem?" Evelyn asked as he ended the call. "The Moretti family." Marco set his coffee down with deliberate control. "They've been pushing boundaries for weeks, small incursions into my territory, testing my responses. Yesterday, they crossed the line. They hit one of my supply trucks, stole pharmaceuticals worth $200,000, Beat my driver badly enough that he's hospitalized. What are you going to do? What I have to. Marco stood, already moving toward his apartment to change into the tactical clothing she'd learned meant violence was coming. This can't go unanswered. If I let the Morettis steal from me without retaliation, every family in Boston will think I'm weak. The empire collapses the moment I stop defending it. Evelyn followed him to the connecting door. Can I come? Marco turned, surprise evident. This isn't like the warehouse with Hastings. This is war, Evelyn. People will get hurt, probably badly. I don't want you anywhere near it. You promised me honesty, she reminded him. Complete transparency. That means I get to see this too. The protection of territory, the violence that keeps the empire stable. I can't be your partner if you only show me the parts you think I can handle. This isn't about what you can handle, Marco said, frustration creeping into his voice. This is about keeping you safe. The Morettis know about you now. They've been watching my movements for weeks. If they see you with me during a retaliation, they'll know exactly how much you matter. That makes you a bigger target. I'm already a target by being yours, Evelyn countered. You said that yourself after the shooting at the construction site. So either I'm in this completely, seeing everything, understanding the full scope, or I'm just another thing you're protecting instead of a real partner. Marco stared at her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he nodded. You stay in the car with Vincent. You observe, but you don't participate. And if I tell you to leave, you leave immediately. Non-negotiable. Agreed. They drove to a warehouse in Southie, Moretti territory, which was itself a statement. Marco was taking the fight to them rather than waiting for another incursion. Vincent briefed them during the drive, his voice clinical as he outlined the plan. Intelligence says 6 Moretti soldiers are using the warehouse to process the stolen pharmaceuticals. They're repackaging it to sell through their own networks. We go in fast, neutralize resistance, reclaim the product, and leave a message that won't be misunderstood. Casualties, Marco asked. Unavoidable but controlled. We're not there to kill unless absolutely necessary. We're there to prove we can reach them anywhere, take back what's ours, and make them think twice before trying it again. The warehouse district was industrial and isolated, perfect for exactly this kind of confrontation. Vincent parked 2 blocks away, positioning the car with clear exit routes. Marco's team, 8 men including Vincent, all armed and moving with military precision, approached from multiple angles. Evelyn watched through the car window as Marco led them through a side entrance. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then gunfire erupted, brief controlled bursts followed by shouting. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. More gunfire, then silence that felt louder than the noise had been. Vincent's radio crackled. Warehouse secure, 6 hostiles neutralized, 3 injured, none critical. Product recovered. Boss wants you to bring the car around. They pulled up to the warehouse loading dock where Marco's team was loading crates into a truck. 3 men sat on the ground with zip-tied hands, bloodied but alive. Marco stood over them, and even from a distance, Evelyn could see the cold fury in his posture. Tell Giacomo Moretti this is his only warning, Marco said, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. He keeps his operations in his territory. I keep mine in mine. He doesn't steal from me. He doesn't touch my people. He doesn't test my patience. The next time he crosses these lines, I don't send people to hospitals. I send them to morgues. Am I clear? The 3 men nodded frantically, fear evident in their faces. Good. Vincent, cut them loose in an hour. Give them time to think about the choices that led here. Marco turned away, spotting Evelyn in the car. Something in his expression shifted. The cold enforcer giving way briefly to the man who'd made love to her that morning, who'd sketched buildings at his drafting table, who'd quoted poetry over breakfast. He climbed into the car, blood on his knuckles, dirt on his clothes, looking every inch the crime boss who'd just reclaimed stolen property through force. But when he met Evelyn's eyes, she saw the question there. The fear that this would be too much, that seeing him like this would change everything. Are you hurt? She asked. No, minor scuffle, nothing serious. His voice was carefully neutral. You saw enough? I saw you protecting what's yours, Evelyn said. I saw you showing restraint when you could have been brutal. I saw you giving a warning when you could have just eliminated the problem. I saw exactly what you told me I'd see, calculated violence in service of stability. And you're okay with that? Marco's voice was almost hesitant. I'm okay with you, Evelyn corrected. All of you, including this part. She reached over, taking his bloodied hand in hers. Drive us home, Vincent. We're done here. The ride home was quiet, Marco cleaning blood from his knuckles with a handkerchief, Evelyn watching the city pass outside the window. When they reached their building, Marco started toward his apartment, but Evelyn caught his hand. My place tonight, she said firmly. Shower, clean clothes, then I want you to show me the new sketches you've been working on. The museum design. I saw it on your desk yesterday, and it looked beautiful. The gratitude in his eyes was profound. This was what partnership meant, not flinching from the violence, but also not letting it define him completely. Reminding him that he was more than the enforcer, more than the crime boss, more than the man who'd just reclaimed stolen property through force. They spent the evening exactly as she'd suggested, Marco showering away the warehouse, changing into comfortable clothes, spreading his museum sketches across her dining table, while explaining his vision for a space that would bring world-class art to neighborhoods that never saw it. The violence of the afternoon faded into context rather than definition, another piece of the complicated whole that was Marco De Luca. Spring came to Boston with the sudden intensity it always did, winter releasing its grip overnight to reveal a city blooming with possibility. Evelyn's writing career was flourishing in ways she'd never imagined. Articles placed in major publications, a short story collection accepted by a respected press, interest from an agent about expanding her work into a novel. None of it had anything to do with Marco's influence. He'd offered to make calls, to use his connections, but she'd refused. This has to be mine, she'd explained. My success? My achievement. The moment your money or power touches my career, it stops being about my talent and starts being about who I'm with. I need to know I earned this. Marco had understood completely, had even seemed relieved. I don't want to own your success any more than you want me to. Build your career on your terms. I'm just here to make sure you have the time and space to do it without worrying about rent or debt or survival. The community center opened in April, and Evelyn was there to document it. Not as Marco's partner, but as a journalist telling the story of a facility that would serve 3 underserved neighborhoods with medical care, after-school programs, and job training. She interviewed the people who'd worked on it, the families who'd benefit from it, the architects who'd brought Marco's vision to reality. The article she wrote never mentioned Marco by name. It focused on the anonymous donor who'd funded the project, on the community members who'd advocated for it, on the tangible good being created. But when it was published in the Boston Globe, Marco read it 3 times, his eyes shining with emotion he didn't try to hide. This is the legacy, he said quietly. Not my name on buildings, but actual good being done. People being helped, communities being strengthened. You told that story better than I ever could have. Because I'm not you, Evelyn said. I'm not the builder. I'm the one who bears witness to what gets built and why it matters. That's my role in this partnership, making sure your work is remembered even if your name isn't attached to it. But even as they built this life together, even as the partnership deepened into something neither had fully anticipated, there was one conversation they'd been avoiding. Evelyn felt it hovering between them like an unasked question. What came next? They'd been together for 6 months now, living in connected apartments, building careers and legacy, functioning as partners in every meaningful way. But they'd never discussed the future beyond the immediate, never talked about whether this arrangement had an expiration date or a progression towards something more permanent. The conversation came unexpectedly on a Saturday morning in May. They were at the construction site of another housing project, Marco explaining the design elements while Evelyn took notes for an article. A family walked past, parents with 2 young children, the kids laughing as they chased each other around the skeletal framework of what would become their home. Marco watched them with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. Do you want children? He asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. I haven't really thought about it. Maybe someday. You? I always assumed I wouldn't, Marco said slowly. That bringing children into this world, my world, would be selfish, dangerous, unfair to them. He paused. But watching you with the kids at the community center opening, seeing how you talk to them, how they responded to you. It made me wonder what kind of mother you'd be, what kind of family we could build if we wanted to. Evelyn's heart was pounding. Marco, are you asking? I'm asking what you want, he interrupted. Not what you think I want or what makes sense given our circumstances. What do you actually want for your future, Evelyn? For our future? She took a breath, finding her courage. I want what we have, but more of it. More permanence, more commitment, more certainty that this isn't temporary. I want to know that when we build these projects, when we create this legacy, we're building it together for the long term. Not just as partners in a business arrangement, but as what? Marco pressed gently. As people who've chosen to build a life together, Evelyn finished. As equals who love each other and want to create something that lasts beyond either of us individually. Marco pulled her close, his hand finding her face with that familiar tenderness. I fell in love with you the night we met, he said quietly. The moment you called me a stalker and challenged me instead of simpering. I've been in love with you through every day since, watching you write, watching you stand your ground, watching you see all of me and choose to stay anyway. I should have said it sooner, should have been brave enough to tell you that this stopped being an arrangement months ago and became something real. I love you too, Evelyn said, the words feeling both momentous and natural. I love the architect and the criminal. I love the man who builds community centers and the man who extracts justice. I love all of you, Marco, completely. They kissed there in the construction site, surrounded by the skeleton of something being built, and it felt like sealing a promise. This was their foundation, love built on honesty, partnership built on choice, a future constructed deliberately by two people who understood exactly what they were creating together. That evening, Marco cooked dinner in his apartment, real cooking, from scratch, the kind his mother had taught him. Evelyn watched from the counter, sipping wine, listening to him talk about the recipes he'd grown up with, the Sunday dinners at Rosa's, the traditions he wanted to preserve even though the world he'd built was so different from the one his parents had known. After dinner, he led her to the living room where he'd set up his drafting table with a new sketch spread across it. But this wasn't a building. It was a ring, elegant, sophisticated, with clean lines and a single diamond set in a band that incorporated tiny architectural elements. I designed it myself, Marco said, his voice uncertain in a way she rarely heard. Had it made by a jeweler I trust. I've been carrying it for 2 weeks, trying to find the right moment. The perfect words, the grand gesture that would match what you mean to me. He turned to face her. But perfect moments don't exist in our world, Evelyn. We exist in gray areas, in complicated spaces, in the messy reality of building something real. So I'm just going to ask. He pulled the actual ring from his pocket, the sketch made real in platinum and diamond, beautiful in its simplicity. Marry me. Not because I'm completing some transaction or claiming you as property, but because I want to build a life with you. I want children who inherit your honesty and your courage. I want to grow old watching you write stories that matter and knowing I helped create the space for that to happen. I want to be your partner in everything, the architecture and the writing, the empire and the legacy, the light and the dark. Marry me, Evelyn Moore, and let's build something that lasts. Evelyn stared at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they'd already built, and the future he was offering. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in debt and invisibility. Now she stood in a beautiful apartment with a man she loved offering her partnership and permanence and a future built on choice rather than necessity. Yes, she said, her voice steady and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because of what you can give me or what you've saved me from, but because I choose you, because I love you, because building a life together is exactly what I want. Marco slipped the ring onto her finger, perfect fit, because of course he'd measured while she slept, because he approached even proposals with the same meticulous planning he brought to everything. Then he pulled her close, and they stood together in front of the windows overlooking the city they both loved, the empire he'd built, and the stories she'd tell about it, the future spreading before them, full of possibility and complexity and promise. We should tell people, Evelyn said eventually. Vincent, Rosa, the people who matter to us. Tomorrow, Marco agreed. Tonight, I just want to be here with you. No empire, No obligations, just us. They spent the night exactly as he'd suggested, cooking together, talking about wedding plans and future projects, making love with the new certainty of commitment, falling asleep tangled together in Evelyn's bed with the ring catching city light on her finger. The wedding happened 3 months later in late August, small and private in keeping with who they were. Rosa's restaurant closed to the public for the evening, transformed with flowers and candlelight. Vincent stood as Marco's best man, Claire as Evelyn's maid of honor, despite her continued confusion about the relationship. A judge who owed Marco several favors performed the ceremony without asking too many questions about the groom's business interests. Evelyn wore a simple dress in ivory silk, elegant and understated. Marco wore a black suit that emphasized the classical lines of his face, his eyes never leaving hers throughout the ceremony. When the judge asked if they took each other, their responses were simultaneous and certain. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering applauded and Evelyn felt something settle into place, the final piece of a life built deliberately, chosen consciously, created together. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted: good food, better wine, people they actually cared about rather than society obligations. Rosa cried and called them both her children. Vincent gave a toast about watching Marco build an empire and seeing him finally find someone who made him want to build something more than power. Claire pulled Evelyn aside and demanded to know how she'd gotten so lucky. "It's not luck," Evelyn said, watching Marco across the room talking with Rosa's grandson about architecture. "It's choice. Every single day we choose each other. We choose honesty over comfortable lies. We choose partnership over possession. We choose to build something together knowing it's complicated and difficult and worth it." "You really love him," Claire said wonderingly. "The crime boss with the sketchy business? You actually love him." "I love all of him," Evelyn corrected. "The crime boss and the architect, the man who operates outside the law and the man who builds community centers, the enforcer and the designer. He's not one thing, Claire. None of us are. And he loves all of me, the struggling writer and the successful one, the uncertain and the confident, every version of who I am and who I'm becoming." Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had departed, Marco and Evelyn walked along the waterfront where it had all begun, past the warehouses where he'd shown her his operations, past the docks where legitimate and illegal commerce intertwined, past the construction sites that would become housing and medical centers and legacy projects that bore no name but served real need. "Regrets?" Marco asked, his arm around her waist. "None," Evelyn said firmly. "Not one single moment. You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," Marco admitted. "All those years building the empire alone, thinking power was enough. If I'd known you existed, I'd have searched every ballroom in Boston until I found you." "You found me when we both needed it," Evelyn said. "Any earlier and I wouldn't have been ready. I needed to be invisible long enough to understand what being seen really meant. I needed to struggle enough to appreciate what partnership offers. I needed to be lost enough to choose the path we're building together." They stood at the water's edge as the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in shades of copper and crimson. In the distance, the city they both loved sprawled across the landscape, Marco's empire woven into its infrastructure, Evelyn's words beginning to document its hidden histories, their shared legacy taking shape in concrete and story. "What happens now?" Marco asked. Evelyn smiled. "Now we live. We build. We create. We face whatever comes knowing we're facing it together." She turned to face him, this complicated, dangerous man who'd offered her honesty instead of pretty lies, partnership instead of possession, choice instead of obligation. "Now we prove that what we've built lasts, that love and legacy can coexist with empire and pragmatism, that two people choosing each other every day can create something more powerful than either could build alone." "Together," Marco agreed, pulling her close. "Together," Evelyn confirmed. They kissed as husband and wife, as partners in crime and creation, as two people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances and built something real in the gray areas between right and wrong. Behind them, the city glittered with evening lights. Before them, the harbor stretched toward horizons they'd explore together. And between them, love and choice and commitment formed a foundation strong enough to support whatever they built next. A year later, Evelyn published her first novel, a story about invisible people finding power, about complicated choices made in moral gray areas, about building legacy despite operating outside conventional systems. It became a bestseller, praised for its unflinching examination of how people survive and thrive in spaces between legal and illegal, right and wrong, safety and danger. Critics never knew the novel was semi-autobiographical, never understood that the crime boss who built community centers was based on reality, never realized that the partnership at the story's heart reflected the one Evelyn lived every day. She accepted awards and gave interviews and built a literary career on her own merit, never mentioning the husband who'd created the space for her success or the empire that funded the legacy projects she wrote about. Marco continued building too. More housing, more medical centers, more architectural dreams made real through wealth acquired by methods that would never appear in official records. The illegal operations continued because they funded the legitimate good, because the gray areas where he operated allowed him to help people. The system failed because pragmatic morality sometimes required uncomfortable choices. They had their first child 2 years after the wedding, a daughter with Marco's dark eyes and Evelyn's stubborn honesty, who grew up surrounded by books and architectural sketches, who learned early that the world was complicated and that good people sometimes operated outside conventional rules. They named her Sophia, after Marco's mother, and raised her to understand that legacy mattered more than legality, that kindness and strength could coexist, that choosing truth over comfortable fiction was always worth the cost. Vincent became her godfather and taught her to assess situations tactically, while Rosa taught her to cook traditional recipes, and Claire sent books from wherever her own life had taken her. Sophia grew up knowing her father was powerful and dangerous and devoted to building things that helped people. She grew up watching her mother write stories that mattered and understanding that words could be as powerful as money or force when used with intention. On Sophia's 5th birthday, Evelyn found Marco at his drafting table working on plans for a library that would serve the neighborhood where he'd grown up. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how my mother would react to all this," Marco said quietly. "Her criminal son, who builds libraries and community centers. Her granddaughter, who's being raised to question systems and fight for what's right, even when it's not legal. The life I've built that she'd simultaneously be proud of and horrified by." "She'd love Sophia," Evelyn said with certainty. "And she'd understand why you built what you built. Mothers want their children to survive and thrive. You've done both. You've just done it in ways she couldn't have anticipated." "Sometimes I still dream about the other life," Marco admitted. "The one where I became a legitimate architect, where my mother survived, where I didn't have to build an empire to save my father from medical debt, where I met you at some normal event and we fell in love without warehouses and confessions and violence." "Would that version of you have noticed me?" Evelyn asked. "Would you have seen past my invisibility if you hadn't operated in gray areas yourself? Would we have built something this real if we'd met under conventional circumstances?" Marco turned to face her, pulling her into his lap. "No," he admitted. "That version of me would have been softer, but also less observant, less willing to see depth in unexpected places, less capable of recognizing someone extraordinary hiding in plain sight. This version, the complicated, dangerous, morally gray version, he saw you immediately. He understood what you were worth. He built a life with you that the legitimate architect never could have." "Then I prefer this version," Evelyn said firmly. "I prefer the man you are. All the contradictions, all the complexity, all the beautiful, difficult reality of who you've become. And I prefer the life we've built, messy and unconventional as it is." They sat together at the drafting table, partners in the truest sense, while Sophia played in the next room with blocks that would probably become buildings, already showing signs of inheriting her father's architectural vision. Outside, the city continued its complicated existence, gray areas and all, the empire Marco had built sustaining the legacy they were creating together. Years passed. The empire evolved but persisted, adapting to new challenges, new technologies, new threats. The community centers multiplied across Boston, serving needs the official systems couldn't or wouldn't address. Evelyn's writing career flourished. her novels exploring the spaces between conventional morality and pragmatic good, her articles documenting the invisible people who kept cities functioning. They celebrated anniversaries at Rosa's restaurant, which Sophia inherited when Rosa passed peacefully in her sleep at 93. They attended ribbon cuttings at libraries and medical centers that bore no DeLuca name but reflected Marco's vision. They faced down rivals and law enforcement and the ordinary challenges of marriage and parenthood with the same partnership they'd built from the beginning: honesty, choice, and commitment to seeing each other completely. On their 10th anniversary, Marco surprised Evelyn with a weekend trip to the property where he'd shown her the first community center under construction. The site had transformed: beautiful buildings surrounding a central plaza, children playing in a park, families accessing medical care and education and opportunity. The anonymous donor's vision made real. "This is us," Marco said as they walked through the plaza. "What we've built together, not just the buildings, but the life, the legacy. The proof that complicated people making difficult choices can create genuine good in the world." "No regrets?" Evelyn asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. "Only that we didn't have more time," Marco said. "That we can't build 1,000 more projects, help 1,000,000 more people, create legacy that spans continents instead of just one city. But what we have built, Evelyn, what we're still building, it matters, it lasts, it helps." "It's enough," Evelyn assured him. "More than enough. We've created something real and good and complicated and worth every difficult choice we've made. We've proved that partnership and love can exist in gray areas, that empire and legacy aren't contradictory, that two people choosing each other every day can build something that outlasts them both." They stood in the center of the plaza they'd created together, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their choices, and watched as children played and families gathered and life flourished in spaces that wouldn't exist without them. It wasn't simple. It wasn't entirely legal. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everything resolved cleanly, but it was real. It was honest. It was theirs. And in the end, that was all they'd ever wanted: to be seen completely, to choose each other freely, to build something that mattered despite operating in the spaces between conventional right and wrong, to prove that love and legacy could coexist with empire and pragmatism, to create a partnership based on truth rather than illusion, on choice rather than necessity, on the brave decision to exist fully in gray areas while building something that served the light. Marco DeLuca and Evelyn Moore had found each other across a ballroom, built a life in warehouses and apartments and construction sites, and created legacy that would outlast their names. They'd chosen the complicated path, the difficult truth, the honest partnership over comfortable fiction, and they'd never once regretted it. Because in the end, being seen, really, truly seen and chosen anyway, was worth every risk, every compromise, every moment of fear or uncertainty. Being partners who built something real together was worth operating in gray areas. Being loved for all of who they were, contradictions and all, was worth the cost of honesty. They'd walked into the gray areas together. And there, in the spaces between black and white, legal and illegal, safe and dangerous, they'd built something extraordinary, something that lasted, something real, together.